Billy Burns watches Supreme Overlord SS Skith's battlecruiser, Iron Fang dock, through the grimy viewport of Atmospheric Processing Unit 7, his hands freezing on the maintenance panel. No one stands up to the Gorn Tyrant, not the merchant Plex scurrying past with their hovercarts, not the proud warrior Krivax averting their eyes, not even the supposedly enlightened Centaurians who preach peace while practicing submission. The massive warship's hull gleams against the backdrop of New Montana below, where 2 million colonists, including Billy's sister and her family, go about their lives unaware of the genocide about to unfold. 50 years of Gorn dominance in this sector has taught humanity harsh lessons about keeping their heads down. Billy learned that lesson well after the Mars colonial wars, trading his marine combat armor for the stained coveralls of a maintenance technician. He taps through the diagnostic screens, documenting everything while maintaining his facade of submissive incompetence. The maintenance override codes burned into his memory could bring this entire station to its knees. They could save millions. They could also get him executed in seconds. The atmospheric readings are fascinating today, aren't they? The soft voice makes Billy's hand twitch toward a weapon he no longer carries. But it's only Celeste, the Gorn scientist who spends more time studying human culture than supporting her species' empire. Her scales shimmer with an iridescence absent in most of her kind. Just routine checks, Billy replies, noting how she positions herself to block security cameras. She knows. She has to know why SS Skith's entire battle fleet has arrived at Dominion's edge. The station's corridors fill with the heavy footfalls of SS Skith's honor guard. They're preparing for his inspection tour, their war skills gleaming under harsh lights. Behind them trail subordinates carrying sealed containers marked with biohazard symbols, the final solution, meant to eliminate human resistance once and for all. Billy's fingers hover over the maintenance panel. One set of commands could trigger cascading failures throughout the station's systems. But no one stands up to SS Skith. No one has survived standing up to SS Skith. The choice before him is simple: remain silent and watch his people die, or act and die alone. He thinks of his sister's face, of the colonists below, of 50 years of documented atrocities stored in his hidden files. His hand moves toward the panel as heavy footsteps approach. The moment of choice arrives with the weight of 2 million lives. Billy's fingers press the maintenance override sequence, but not to trigger catastrophic failure. Instead, he accesses the station's security feeds, splitting his display between diagnostic readings and surveillance footage of SS Skith's procession. The Supreme Overlord's massive frame fills the corridors as he inspects his domain, flanked by guards carrying the biohazard containers. The environmental systems require attention in several sectors, Celeste says, her scaled hand brushing against Billy's workstation. A data chip slides from beneath her sleeve. Perhaps you should check the readings in Laboratory 7. Billy pockets the chip and nods, maintaining his facade of dull servitude. Yes, Doctor, I'll see to it immediately. The night cycle brings relative quiet to Dominion's edge. Billy's boots echo through empty corridors as he approaches Dr. Murray's lab, his maintenance badge granting him access to restricted areas. Inside, holographic displays show genetic sequences, human DNA strands being twisted and corrupted by an engineered pathogen. "Close the door," Dr. Murray whispers, emerging from behind a partition. The geneticist's eyes dart between screens and shadows. "They'll execute my family if anyone discovers this conversation. The weapon, it's Mars dust fever, modified to target human genetic markers exclusively." Murray's hands shake as he transfers files to Billy's maintenance tablet. The atmospheric processors are the delivery system, once it enters the colonist's lungs. A shadow passes the laboratory window. Both men freeze until the patrol moves on. Security Chief Thragek's voice crackles over the station's comm system. "Attention all personnel. Implementation of enhanced surveillance protocols begins immediately. All maintenance activities require double authentication. Billy's access to the security feeds reveals increased guard rotations, but also their patterns. During his rounds, he observes Senior Engineer Kazik working alone in the Environmental Control Hub, muttering about SS Skith's corruption of Gorn honor. The disgraced engineer's access codes could prove invaluable. Celeste's data chip contains schematics of SS Skith's battle armor, highlighting the environmental seals designed for Gorn atmospheric requirements. Billy studies the specifications between maintenance calls, noting vulnerabilities to sudden pressure differentials. The central environmental control hub looms before him during his next shift. Guards stand at attention, their war skills reflecting harsh lighting. Billy approaches with his toolkit maintenance logs displayed on his tablet. Scheduled diagnostic, he says, displaying work orders authorized by Celeste. The guards exchange glances but allow him entry. Inside, he begins the careful process of accessing restricted systems while appearing to perform routine maintenance. Security feeds show Thragak reviewing footage, his clawed hand tapping against his console as he studies maintenance logs with increasing intensity. Time grows short as Billy works to establish a secure communication channel with Murray through encrypted maintenance requests. The station's power grid fluctuates during the maintenance cycle, a window of opportunity approaches. But Thragak's voice echoes through the corridors. All department heads report for immediate security audit, full review of all logs and footage from the past 30 days. Billy's tablet chimes with an encrypted message from Murray, weapon deployment scheduled within 48 hours. Transportation to atmospheric processing units begins at 600. Through his security feed access, Billy watches SS Skith's forces prepare for the coming genocide, while the station's human population continues their daily routines, unaware of the invisible death being readied above their homes. His fingers move across his maintenance panel, inputting commands that will determine the fate of millions. Billy's fingers dance across the maintenance panel, initiating a cascade of minor system failures throughout the station's secondary networks. Warning indicators flash across his screen: environmental recyclers in Block C malfunction, waste processing in Section 12 backs up, lighting systems in the cargo bays flicker and dim. Multiple system failures detected, the station's automated voice announces. Maintenance teams required in Sections 3, 7, 12, and 15. Through his security feed, Billy watches Gorn repair crews scramble to address the spreading technical issues. Security Chief Thragak snarls orders at his subordinates, directing them to escort the maintenance teams. The controlled chaos thins their coverage, creating gaps in their security grid. A scaled hand touches his shoulder. Billy spins to find Razka, a Krivax maintenance worker, her crystalline eyes reflecting the emergency lights. "The power distribution failures match patterns I've seen before," she whispers. "Patterns I've created." Billy studies her face, noting the familiar signs of someone who has lived too long under SS Skith's boot. "How long have you been sabotaging their equipment?" "Since they turned my homeworld into their mining pit." Razka gestures toward a maintenance shaft behind a seemingly solid wall panel. "These tunnels bypass their checkpoints. They never bothered learning the station's original design." In Laboratory 7, Dr. Murray's hands move with practiced precision as he modifies the weapon's viral structure. His screen displays identical-looking genetic sequences, one lethal, one benign. Laboratory Supervisor Hexa looms behind him, her breath hot on his neck. The protein markers appear. "Unusual," Hexa says, mandibles clicking. "Run the verification sequence again." Murray's tablet vibrates with an encrypted message from Billy. "Secondary systems compromised. Proceeding to backup power distribution." Celeste intercepts Billy near the backup power center, pressing a data chip into his hand. "The Iron Fang carries a redundant deployment system," she whispers. "These schematics show the vulnerabilities, but we have another problem." The station's main viewer activates, showing an approaching transport vessel. "Attention all personnel," Thragek's voice announces. "Prepare for arrival of diplomatic delegation from New Montana." Billy's blood runs cold as the passenger manifest scrolls across his tablet. Sarah Burns, lead colonial representative. His sister. "Authorization required for power grid diagnostic," senior engineer Kazik grumbles, hunched over his workstation. "Cannot proceed without Administrator Vorex's approval code." Billy accesses the station's communication system through his maintenance credentials. "Administrator Vorex, primary power grid showing signs of quantum flux. Request authorization for full diagnostic cycle." The administrator's scaled face appears on his screen. "Maintenance technician, site-specific regulation regarding unscheduled power diagnostics. Station Protocol 47 Beta, Administrator. In cases of potential quantum degradation, immediate grid analysis is required to prevent cascade failure." Billy holds his breath as Vorex studies him through the video feed. Regulation correctly cited. Authorization granted. Security feeds show Thragek reviewing footage from Section 7, his claws tapping against his console with increasing agitation. A message flashes across Billy's tablet. Security credentials under review. Authentication protocols being updated. The diplomatic transport docks as Billy races against time, rerouting emergency power protocols through his maintenance access. Each override must be precise. A single error would trigger station-wide alarms. Through the viewport, he watches Sarah step onto the station, escorted by SS Skith's honor guard. "Weapon deployment scheduled for next shift," Murray's message reads. "Hexa suspects tampering, running out of time." Billy's fingers move faster across his panel, knowing his maintenance access could be revoked at any moment. The fate of millions balances on a knife's edge, with his sister now at its center. His security feed shows SS Skith greeting the diplomatic delegation, massive frame towering over the humans. Behind them, technicians ready the biological weapon for distribution, unaware that their carefully laid plans have already begun to unravel. Billy's fingers freeze over the control panel as he processes the shock of seeing Sarah. Her presence transforms his carefully calculated risk into an immediate personal nightmare. He forces his attention back to the maintenance diagnostics, initiating a cascade of system checks that create periodic brownouts across the station's secondary grids. "Environmental processing in Block D requires attention," he announces over the maintenance channel, establishing his alibi. The brownout provides cover as he slips into a maintenance shaft, using Razka's revealed access point to bypass the primary security checkpoints. The duct system leads him to Laboratory 7. Through the ventilation grate, he observes Dr. Murray working under Hexa's scrutiny. The geneticist's movements are precise as he handles two seemingly identical viral samples, one designed to devastate humanity, the other modified to be harmless. Billy times his entrance with the next scheduled power fluctuation. "Status report," Hexa demands, mandibles clicking as the lights dim. In that moment of darkness, Billy retrieves the modified sample, his maintenance uniform allowing him to blend with the shadows. Security Chief Thragek's voice echoes through the station. "All non-essential personnel are confined to quarters until system stability is restored." The order works in Billy's favor, clearing the corridors of civilian traffic. Through his security feed access, he watches Sarah and the other New Montana delegates being escorted to their diplomatic quarters. SS Skith's honor guard takes positions outside their doors, weapons ready. Level 47 houses an abandoned maintenance hub, forgotten during the station's last renovation cycle. Billy converts the space into an operations center, using discarded equipment to mask their activities. Razka installs signal scramblers while her crystalline eyes scan for surveillance devices. The environmental control codes, Senior Engineer Kazik says, transferring data to Billy's tablet. Use them wisely. My credentials will be flagged if detected. A priority alert flashes across Billy's screen. Laboratory supervisor Hexa has completed her analysis. His heart rate spikes until a message from Celeste appears. Hexa lost family to SS Skith. She'll maintain silence, but his science officer performs final verification in 6 hours. Billy accesses the cargo manifests one final time before his maintenance credentials expire. The data confirms his worst fears. Delivery pods are being loaded with the weapon, targeting not just New Montana but Earth itself. Every human settlement in controlled space sits in SS Skith's crosshairs. Administrator Vorex's security drill provides crucial intelligence. Billy observes the guard rotations through camera feeds, noting the 3-minute gap in coverage around SS Skith's private chambers. More importantly, he studies the environmental controls for those rooms, calibrated specifically for Gorn physiology. The atmospheric processors in this section operate on an isolated circuit, Celeste explains, displaying the environmental specifications. SS Skith requires precise conditions. Any deviation could compromise his entire defense system, Billy finishes, studying the data. He distributes Razka's signal scramblers throughout key junction points, preparing to disable security station-wide. Through the security feeds, he watches Thragek reviewing system logs, the security chief's clawed finger tracing patterns of failure across his screen. Time grows short as the investigation closes in. In Laboratory 7, Dr. Murray continues his careful deception while SS Skith's science officer approaches for the final verification. Billy checks his tablet one last time, confirming the positions of his allies. Each piece sits ready: the modified samples, the environmental controls, the security gaps. But Sarah's presence aboard the station leaves no room for error. One mistake, one missed detail, would doom not just her but millions of others. The science officer's footsteps echo through the corridor, approaching Laboratory 7. Billy's finger hovers over the control that will trigger the first phase of his countermeasure. The moment of execution arrives. Billy's finger descends on the control panel, initiating a cascading series of failures throughout the waste management system. Red warning indicators flash across his screen as environmental hazards force the evacuation of security checkpoints in Sectors 7, 12, and 15. Biohazard detected in Security Hub Alpha, the station's automated system announces. Emergency protocols engaged. Through his security feed, Billy watches Gorn security personnel abandon their posts, creating gaps in the station's surveillance network. He shoulders his maintenance pack and slips into the access tunnel. Razka revealed, leaving the chaos behind. Dr. Murray's voice crackles through his earpiece. "We have a problem. Dr. Nexa arrived early for verification. The transmission cuts off as the science officer enters Laboratory 7. Begin the analysis sequence, Doctor." Nexa commands, her scaled tail twitching as she approaches the containment unit. Supreme Overlord SS Skith requires confirmation within 2 hours. Billy diverts through a narrow maintenance shaft, checking his tablet as security alerts flood the system. Thragek's voice echoes through the station. Deploy thermal imaging units to all maintenance sectors. Find the source of these disruptions. The shaft narrows, forcing Billy to crawl on his stomach. Ancient dust covers panels marked with faded numbers from the station's original construction. Kazik's knowledge proves invaluable. These passages don't appear on any current station schematics. His tablet vibrates with an encrypted message from Celeste. SS Skith scheduled formal dinner with New Montana delegates. Plans to broadcast weapon deployment. Sarah will be there. Heat signatures approach from an adjacent corridor. Billy presses against a maintenance panel as security forces sweep past, their thermal scanners probing the walls. He checks his chronometer. Administrator Vorex's new paired assignment policy takes effect at next shift change. 6 hours remain. Emergency alert. Hex's voice cuts through his comm channel. Weapon loading procedures initiated on Iron Fang, using original strain. Billy accesses Celeste's schematics of the Iron Fang, studying the ship's atmospheric processing system. The intake manifold vulnerability matches the station's design, a critical flaw hidden in plain sight. He establishes his position in an abandoned processing node, surrounded by dormant atmospheric controls. From here, he can monitor SS Skith's private chambers while accessing life support systems. Razka's signal scramblers redirect maintenance alerts, masking his presence. Environmental specifications for Gorn physiology uploaded, Kazakh transmits. Optimal temperature range highlighted. Billy's fingers move across the control panel, installing bypass circuits in the atmospheric processors serving SS Skith's chambers. Each modification must be precise. The Supreme Overlord's battle armor provides protection against most environmental threats. A heat signature appears on his scanner, approaching through the maintenance shaft. Security forces converge from both directions, their thermal imaging equipment tracking his position. Unidentified signature detected in maintenance shaft 23A, Thragak announces. Lock down all access points. Capture intruder alive for interrogation. Heavy footsteps echo through the tunnel as security teams close in. Billy completes the final bypass connection, sweat dripping onto the circuit board as he seals the access panel. The approaching forces leave him trapped between SS Skith's personal guards and Thragak's security teams. His tablet displays the station's security feed. Dr. Nexa methodically analyzing the weapon strain while Dr. Murray assists, maintaining his cover. In the diplomatic quarter, Sarah reviews trade agreements, unaware of the forces moving around her. The Iron Fang's cargo bay shows crews loading delivery pods with the lethal virus. Boots scrape against metal as the security teams draw closer. Billy checks his tablet one final time, confirming the atmospheric processor modifications. The heavy tread of Gorn armor approaches from both directions. Billy taps his tablet, accessing the waste management controls for Section 23. His fingers dance across the interface, initiating an emergency containment breach. Noxious fumes flood the maintenance shaft as warning klaxons blare. Hazardous material detected, the station AI announces. Evacuating affected sectors. The sound of retreating footsteps echoes through the shaft as both security teams withdraw. Billy pulls a pressure suit from his maintenance pack, quickly sealing himself inside the protective gear. The air scrubbers hum as he activates the suit's life support systems. Through his helmet display, Billy watches the security feeds. Teams of Gorn warriors fall back from the contaminated area, their scaled faces contorted in frustration. He moves through the toxic cloud, his suit's sensors guiding him past the worst concentrations of gas. A maintenance terminal catches his eye. Billy connects his tablet, accessing the cargo loading systems. The manifest confirms his fears. 3 weapon pods already sit in the Iron Fang's hold. He studies the loading mechanism schematics, identifying a crucial calibration point. Adjusting load balancer alignment by 0.3 degrees, he mutters, making minute adjustments through his tablet. The loading arm shudders, its precision timing disrupted. Alert! Loading system malfunction detected, the cargo computer announces. Manual inspection required before continuing transfer operations. Dr. Murray's voice crackles through his earpiece. Nexa's found something. She's comparing growth patterns, demanding samples from the Iron Fang's cargo. The transmission carries an edge of barely controlled panic. Billy's suit sensors detect movement maintenance crews responding to the loading system failure. He retreats deeper into the contaminated sector, using his tablet to track the spreading gas cloud. Administrator Vorex's voice booms through the station. Security Alert Level 1. All personnel restricted to current sectors. Security teams to designated containment points. The feed from the diplomatic quarter shows Sarah packing in her quarters, now guarded by 4 heavily armed Gorn warriors. Billy accesses the atmospheric control center through his tablet, studying the environmental system architecture. Uploading station specifications, Celeste's message appears. SS Skith's preparing his shuttle, he suspects. Billy begins modifying the atmospheric processors, creating a network of linked failure points. Each adjustment requires precise timing, coordinated across multiple access nodes. The partial implementation leaves gaps in the cascade sequence, but time grows short. Kazac's engineering authority provides cover as systems shut down across the station. Maintenance crews scramble to respond, creating chaos that masks Billy's movements. Through the security feeds, he watches Hexa studying the pattern of failures, her expression darkening with suspicion. All maintenance personnel report for identity verification. Thragek's order echoes through the station. Full documentation review in progress. Razka's message flashes across Billy's tablet, 90 minutes until work log audit reveals discrepancies. In Laboratory 7, Dr. Nexa loads weapon samples into the analysis chamber. Prepare comparison protocols, she orders Dr. Murray. Retrieve verification samples from Iron Fang cargo hold. Billy studies his tablet, watching the atmospheric modification progress bars inch forward. The incomplete system changes might not fully penetrate SS Skith's battle armor. He glances at the lab feed again, Dr. Nexa's claws hovering over the sample analysis controls. Time for precision engineering expires. Billy's gloved finger moves toward the atmospheric control override, knowing the next moments will determine the fate of millions. Billy's fingers dance across the atmospheric controls. No more time for precise calibration. Dr. Nexa's analysis threatens to expose everything. He initiates the cascade sequence, watching pressure readings spike across SS Skith's private chambers. Warning klaxons blare as emergency bulkheads slam shut. Through security feeds, Billy observes SS Skith's battle armor engaging automatically, servos whirring as the system responds to the sudden atmospheric breach. The Supreme Overlord's scaled hands grip his desk as wind howls through the compromised chamber. Multiple environmental failures detected in Sector 1, the station AI announces. Emergency evacuation protocols engaged. Security Chief Thragek's voice cuts through the chaos. Deploy response teams to Supreme Overlord's chambers and Laboratory 7 immediately. Full containment procedures. Billy watches the security feed split between sectors. Half of Thragek's forces rush to protect their leader while others converge on the laboratory. The division creates a critical opening. The cargo loading bays sit vulnerable. His maintenance credentials flash red on the display, minutes from expiration. Billy accesses the loading bay controls, initiating an emergency purge of the atmospheric processors. Warning indicators flash as the bay's environment vents to space, forcing the loading crews to retreat. In Laboratory 7, Dr. Murray moves with calculated clumsiness. His elbow knocks a tray of atmospheric sampling containers into the verification chamber. My deepest apologies, Dr. Nexa. The samples are contaminated. The female Gorn scientist's tail lashes in frustration. This delay is unacceptable. Begin security sweeps of this laboratory immediately. Administrator Vorex's voice echoes through the station, implementing emergency containment protocols. All sectors sealed until further notice. Billy studies his tactical display as containment barriers create a patchwork of isolated zones. Sarah's diplomatic quarters now sit separated from SS Skith's direct control. The security teams fragment, trapped between sealed sectors. Using Kazac's access codes, Billy redirects emergency power through specific processors. Atmospheric failures spread across the station in seemingly random patterns, masking his true target, the environmental systems in SS Skith's battle armor. Alert! Anomalous pattern detected in system failures. A new voice announces over the security channel. This is Officer Drax. These malfunctions correlate with maintenance access points, initiating targeted sweep of all engineering junctions. Billy's tablet flashes with an encrypted message from Celeste. SS Skith ordering shuttle prep. He knows armor systems compromised. Through the security feeds, Laboratory Supervisor Hexa approaches Dr. Nex's workstation. Potential containment breach detected. Emergency sterilization protocols required for all weapon samples. Sterilization will take 12 hours, Dr. Nexa protests. Station protocols are absolute, Hexa replies, her voice firm. Billy reaches the primary life support hub, establishing control over the central atmospheric systems. His fingers fly across the master control panel, preparing the final sequence that will completely compromise SS Skith's armor. Movement on the security feeds catches his attention. Officer Drax directs elite security units to surround the life support hub. The Gorn security specialist's eyes narrow as he studies system diagrams. Target identified, Drax announces. Secure all approaches to central life support. The saboteur is there. Heavy footsteps echo through the corridors as security teams take position. Billy checks his tablet. 3 weapon pods still sit in the Iron Fang's hold, ready for deployment. The station's security feeds show Sarah packing in her sealed quarters while SS Skith's shuttle undergoes launch preparation. Drax's voice carries through the sealed doors. We have you surrounded. Surrender now. Billy's hands hover over the atmospheric controls. Outside, the sound of plasma cutters signals the security team's approach through the reinforced walls. His eyes dart between the environmental readings from SS Skith's armor and the weapon pods aboard the Iron Fang, searching for a solution before the security teams breach the hub. Billy's fingers flew across the control panel, accessing the emergency coolant systems. The plasma cutters outside grew louder, their high-pitched whines signaling imminent breach. Final warning, Drax called. Surrender now or we breach. Billy initiated the emergency purge sequence. Supercooled gas erupted from vents throughout the hub, instantly fogging the air. The temperature plummeted as crystalline particles filled the chamber. Through his pressure suit's displays, he watched the security team stumble back from their positions, their armor's sensors overwhelmed by the extreme cold. A maintenance access point behind the primary coolant regulators caught his eye. Billy pulled himself through the narrow opening, his suit scraping against the tunnel walls. The cramped passage wound through the station's infrastructure, connecting life support to waste processing. All waste processing operations suspended, Thragek's voice echoed through the station. Lock down all maintenance access points. Billy's tablet displayed a critical alert: toxic byproducts backing up in the power core's filtration system. Administrator Vorex's response came swiftly. Override waste processing shutdown, Vorex commanded. Core containment protocols take priority. The waste channels hummed back to life. Billy navigated through the active conduits, his suit's sensors guiding him past dangerous concentrations of processing chemicals. He emerged near the primary docking ring, ducking behind a cargo container. SS Skith's personal shuttle sat on the pad, its engines cycling through pre-launch sequences. Through his tablet feed, Billy observed crackling energy along the Supreme Overlord's armor seals damage from the atmospheric sabotage, but not enough to penetrate the suit's defenses. Supreme Overlord transferring flag to Iron Fang, Celeste's message flashed. Weapon deployment proceeding from orbit. A new transmission caught Billy's attention, a secure ping through Razka's encrypted channel. Technical specialist Myra, her Centaurian features sharp in the docking bay's harsh light, appeared on his display. "I know what you're trying to prevent," she transmitted. "My people suffered under his weapons. I can help you access docking control." In Laboratory 7, Fleet Commander Visksak strode through the doors, his decorated armor gleaming. Dr. Murray's hands stilled over his samples as the war hero approached. "Transfer all weapon components to the Iron Fang immediately," Visksak ordered. "Scientific protocols are suspended by military authority." Billy's tablet chimed with an urgent alert. Burns's sister identified among diplomats, Drax announced over the security channel. "Secure the diplomatic quarter." Laboratory Supervisor Hex's voice cut through the command channel. "Diplomatic quarter under immediate quarantine. Possible weapon exposure detected. No entry without Level 1 clearance." Billy met Myra at a maintenance junction near the docking control center. Her fingers danced across an engineering terminal, bypassing security protocols. "Docking clamp diagnostic cycle initiated," she transmitted. "We have 3 minutes before automated systems detect the intrusion." Through the security feeds, Billy watched Dr. Murray carefully packaging weapon samples under Visksak's stern supervision. In the diplomatic quarter, Sarah paced her sealed chambers while Hex's quarantine kept Drax's forces at bay. The Iron Fang's cargo hold displayed 3 weapon pods, ready for deployment. Myra's diagnostic cycle created a cascade of warning lights across the docking control board. Billy accessed the system through his tablet, preparing to execute their ultimate attempt as SS Skith shuttle engines roared to life. Billy glanced at Myra's diagnostic display as warning indicators cascaded across the docking control systems. Each carefully timed malfunction spread through the primary docking ring's mechanisms, compromising structural integrity safeguards and environmental seals. "Docking Bay 1 no longer secure for launch," the station AI announced. "Rerouting shuttle departure to secondary bay." Myra's fingers flew across her terminal, masking their interference patterns. Trajectory adjusted. "He'll have to evacuate through the Iron Fang's berth." Security feeds showed Drax gesturing to a squad of black-armored troops. The shadow scales moved with fluid precision, their specialized atmosphere suits gleaming under the emergency lights. They established a cordon around the secondary docking bay, cutting off all standard access routes. "Transfer all weapon components immediately," Visksak's voice echoed through the cargo systems. "Standard safety protocols suspended by direct order." Billy accessed the cargo transfer junction's environmental controls through his tablet. Multiple weapon pods converged on a single transfer point, their containment seals exposed to the station's atmosphere. He initiated a series of micro-adjustments to the atmospheric pressure, creating subtle stress patterns across the pod's protective casings. A new voice cut through the command channel. "Engineering override initiated." Chief Engineer Raltak's gruff tone carried decades of experience, detecting deliberate atmospheric manipulation in cargo systems. Warning messages flashed across Billy's display as his access to maintenance systems began failing. Through the security feeds, he watched the shadow scales methodically sweep each section of the cargo transfer area, their modified sensors penetrating the environmental disturbances. His tablet pinged with an encrypted message. "Brother." Sarah's text appeared in the maintenance channel. "Accessing New Montana's atmospheric processor specs now. The weapons dispersal mechanism, there's a critical flaw in the distribution matrix." A priority alert flashed from Celeste. SS Skith's armor recalibration cycle in 15 minutes. Window of vulnerability identified. The message cut off abruptly. "Security breach detected in information systems." "User access suspended," scrolled across the screen. Billy studied the converging threats on his tactical display. The shadow scales advanced from 3 directions while Raltak's override slowly locked down environmental systems. In the weapon storage area, Hexa initiated emergency containment protocols, sealing the remaining pods behind decontamination barriers. Military override of containment protocols commencing, Visczak announced. Estimated completion, 3 minutes. Through the station's cameras, Billy watched SS Skith's shuttle dock in the secondary bay. The Supreme Overlord's battle armor showed signs of stress from the earlier atmospheric attacks, its energy readings fluctuating as the recalibration cycle approached. The maintenance junction provided access to both the weapon pods and SS Skith's evacuation route. Billy's hands hovered over his tablet's controls. The Shadowscale's bootfalls echoed through adjacent corridors as station systems continued falling to Raltak's override. Time and options dwindled with each passing second. The weapon pods sat vulnerable at the transfer junction, while SS Skith's armor weaknesses remained unexploited. Billy checked his tablet's countdown 2 minutes until complete lockout from station systems. Targets position triangulated, a Shadowscale commander transmitted, converging on Maintenance Junction 4. Billy accessed Sarah's data on the weapon's dispersal mechanism, analyzing the distribution matrix as the sound of armored footsteps grew closer. The security feeds showed Visczak's override reaching 90% completion, while SS Skith's armor entered preliminary recalibration sequences. Plasma cutters activated in the adjacent corridor. The maintenance junction's reinforced walls wouldn't hold for long against the Shadowscale's advanced equipment. Billy studied the atmospheric controls, watching security teams close in from all directions as critical systems slipped from his grasp. Billy assessed his tactical options through the tablet's display. The Shadowscale's plasma cutters continued their steady progress through the maintenance junction's walls, while station systems slipped from his control. A quick analysis of Sarah's data on the weapon's distribution matrix revealed a critical vulnerability, one he could exploit alongside SS Skith's approaching armor recalibration. His fingers moved across the tablet with precision, accessing the cargo transfer junction's atmospheric processors. The systems responded sluggishly as Raltak's override spread through the station, but Billy managed to initiate a controlled pressure buildup in the transfer area. Warning indicators flashed as pressure levels rose around the weapon pod's containment seals. Multiple system anomalies detected in cargo transfer, the station AI announced. Pressure variance exceeding safety parameters. Myra's voice crackled through his comm. Secondary docking bay environmental subsystems compromised. Routing control access to your tablet now. The Shadowscale sensor readings appeared on Billy's display, showing their search patterns shifting to account for the atmospheric disturbances. A new alert caught his attention: combat engineer Krivax's arrival from the Iron Fang. Priority override, Krivax transmitted. Detecting critical pressure buildup in cargo transfer, initiating emergency stabilization protocols. Through the security feeds, Billy watched Dr. Murray working under Visczak's stern gaze. The scientist's movements appeared normal, but Billy noticed subtle manipulations as Murray accessed the pod's guidance systems. Microscopic adjustments to the tracking protocols would ensure the weapons never reached their targets on New Montana. Sarah's encrypted message flashed across his tablet. Coordinating with Hexa, expanding quarantine zones to restrict security movement. Laboratory Supervisor Hexa's voice confirmed the action. Multiple containment breaches detected, implementing emergency quarantine protocols in sections 4 through 7. The Shadowscale's plasma cutters fell silent as new containment barriers activated, forcing them to adjust their approach. Billy used the momentary reprieve to establish atmospheric control around SS Skith's recalibration chamber. Chief Engineer Raltak's gruff voice cut through the command channel, initiating complete life support reset, all systems preparing for shutdown. The reset sequence began, but error messages immediately flooded the engineering displays. Senior engineer Kazac's systems access created cascading failures throughout non-critical areas, sowing confusion among Gorn Command. Security breach detected in diplomatic quarter, Security Chief Thragak announced. All units prepare for containment breach. Secure hostages immediately. Billy's tablet showed Sarah packing her quarters as security forces assembled outside. Time grew critical as combat engineer Krivax's analysis of the cargo transfer junction proceeded. Alert, Krivax transmitted. Weapon guidance systems compromised. Full security sweep of scientific personnel required. Fleet Commander Viskzak turned his attention to Dr. Murray. Secure all laboratory staff. No one leaves until systems are verified. Station Administrator Vorex's priority command interrupted all channels. Emergency venting protocol activated. All non-essential areas preparing for atmospheric purge. Warning klaxons blared as emergency bulkheads sealed throughout the station. Billy accessed the maintenance systems, creating a network of stable pressure zones to protect his position and maintain the atmospheric trap. Through the security feeds, he watched SS Skith enter the recalibration chamber, elite guards taking position outside. The Supreme Overlord's armor readings showed increasing instability as the recalibration cycle began. Billy positioned himself near a maintenance access point, monitoring multiple systems as chaos spread through the station. The pressure trap around the weapon pods remained active, Krivax's countermeasures slowed by Kazac's system failures. Sarah's quarantine zones held back Thragak's forces, while Vorex's venting protocol threatened to expose everything. SS Skith's armor entered its vulnerable recalibration phase. Billy's hands moved across his tablet, preparing to execute the precise atmospheric manipulation that would compromise the suit's defenses. Security feeds showed multiple crises converging Thragak's forces approaching the diplomatic quarter, Krivax analyzing the weapon pods, and emergency venting protocols spreading through the station's sectors. The Supreme Overlord stood in the recalibration chamber, armor systems exposed. Billy watched the readings carefully, waiting for the perfect moment to strike as chaos engulfed the station around him. Billy's fingers danced across the tablet controls, triggering a precise atmospheric manipulation in the recalibration chamber. Pressure sensors spiked as the localized disturbance struck SS Skith's exposed armor systems. Through the security feeds, microscopic fractures spread across the Supreme Overlord's environmental seals, compromising the suit's integrity. Critical pressure variance detected, the station AI announced. Recalibration sequence aborted. SS Skith's personal guard rushed forward, their scaled hands gripping the Supreme Overlord's arms as warning indicators flashed across his armor displays. The incomplete recalibration left diagnostic panels blinking amber, power distribution systems operating at 60% efficiency. Multiple containment anomalies detected, combat engineer Krivax transmitted. Implementing emergency protocols in cargo transfer junction. The engineer's countermeasures activated, flooding the weapon storage area with containment fields. The defensive response collided with Dr. Murray's sabotage tracking systems. 2 weapon pods flashed red on Billy's display, their internal sensors registering critical failures. Evacuate cargo transfer immediately, Viskzak ordered. Possible biological contamination in progress. Security feeds showed personnel fleeing the cargo area as containment alarms blared. The weapon transfer ground to a halt, pods locked behind emergency barriers. In the diplomatic quarter, Security Chief Thragak positioned assault teams outside Sarah's chambers. Prepare to breach quarantine barriers on my mark. Before Thragak could give the order, emergency vents activated in surrounding sections. Corridors filled with rushing air as Administrator Vorex's protocol created a maze of impassable pressure zones. Security teams scrambled to maintain position, their formations broken by the atmospheric turbulence. Billy's tablet pinged with an incoming transmission. Burns. The gruff voice belonged to Maintenance Director Grau. These system failures match old maintenance backdoors. My backdoors. Security feeds showed the veteran Gorn engineer accessing terminal after terminal, methodically sweeping the station's infrastructure. Each scan brought him closer to exposing Billy's hidden access routes. Critical update. Hexa transmitted through encrypted channels. Iron Fang's atmospheric systems upgraded with experimental tech. Previous vulnerabilities no longer viable. Billy's planned attack on the ship's life support crumbled. Through the security feeds, he watched Fleet Commander Viskzak stride onto the Iron Fang's bridge. "Begin emergency departure sequence," Viskzak ordered. "We break dock in 15 minutes with or without remaining cargo." Myra's voice cut through Billy's comm. "The dock break protocols, we can use the decontamination sequence. It'll hit both SS Skith and the weapons, but we need physical access to docking control." Security feeds showed Drax's shadow scales surrounding the docking hub, their modified sensors sweeping every approach. Billy accessed the maintenance shaft blueprints, plotting a route through the station's deteriorating infrastructure. Warning klaxons blared as random pressure fluctuations rocked the station. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut across multiple sectors, while Maintenance Director Grau's systematic sweep eliminated access point after access point. Billy entered the maintenance shaft network, crawling through narrow tubes as environmental systems fluctuated around him. His tablet displayed multiple countdown timers, the Iron Fang's departure sequence, Thragax reorganizing security teams, and Grau's approaching system sweep. The station groaned, metal stress increasing as atmospheric controls continued failing. Behind Billy, a bulkhead sealed with a pneumatic hiss, cutting off his retreat. Ahead, the path to docking control remained open, but for how long remained uncertain. Through his tablet's feeds, Billy watched Sarah packing her chambers while Thragax forces regrouped. In the cargo area, the weapon pods sat dormant behind containment fields. The Iron Fang's engines began preliminary startup sequences as SS Skith's guards rushed him toward an emergency pressure station. The maintenance shaft curved upward, leading Billy closer to the docking hub. Random pressure spikes rattled the tubes around him as the station's systems descended further into chaos. Billy's tablet vibrated with an incoming transmission from Razka. "Signal scramblers activated. You're masked from primary sensors." The maintenance shaft's metal walls creaked under shifting pressure gradients. Billy checked his tablet's environmental readouts. Pockets of extreme pressure differentials dotted his path ahead, created by the station's failing atmospheric systems. A section of paneling burst inward 20 meters behind him, forcing an emergency bulkhead to slam shut. His tablet displayed Maintenance Director Grau's methodical sweep spreading through the station's infrastructure. The veteran Gorn's teams moved with practiced efficiency, sealing access points and checking maintenance backdoors. Billy plotted a new route through partially pressurized sections, watching the timing of emergency bulkhead activations. "Alert!" Combat Engineer Krivax's voice cut through the command channel. "Implementing pressure stabilization matrix around weapon pods. Containment breach neutralization in progress." Billy's display showed Krivax's countermeasures taking effect. The weapon pod's warning indicators shifted from red to yellow as pressure equalization restored stable atmospheric conditions. "Transfer protocols reactivating," Krivax transmitted. "Prepare secure transport to Iron Fang." Through security feeds, Billy watched demolitions expert Karvak approach the diplomatic quarter. The specialist's modified plasma cutters glowed with focused energy as he began methodically breaching the quarantine barriers protecting Sarah's position. "Diplomatic quarter breach estimated 28 minutes, Karvak reported to Security Chief Thragak. Administrator Vorex's emergency venting continued spreading through the station. Security stations near the docking control hub evacuated as atmosphere rushed from compromised sections. The shadow scales remained in position, protected by portable containment fields that shimmered with each pressure wave. Dr. Murray's encrypted message flashed across Billy's tablet. Viscsac orders termination of human science staff post-transfer. No witnesses. The security feed showed SS Skith entering a medical bay, technicians swarming around his damaged armor. Chief Medical Officer Thex strode through the doors, her scaled features set in concentration as she examined the Supreme Overlord's compromised seals. "These atmospheric disruptions show clear patterns," Thex announced. "Someone is deliberately targeting the armor's vulnerable points during recalibration." "Burns." Myra's voice crackled through his comm. "Secondary route available through waste reclamation. Hazardous but unguarded." The Iron Fang's engines hummed to life, electromagnetic interference causing Billy's tablet display to flicker. Atmospheric processors throughout the station fluctuated wildly in response to the building power signature. Laboratory Supervisor Hex's voice carried tension. Emergency lockdown initiated in all weapon research facilities. Critical containment protocols in effect. "Security log analysis required," Dr. Nexa responded. "Recent system access patterns suggest coordinated interference." Billy reached a critical junction in the maintenance network. To his right, the waste reclamation route offered a hidden approach to the docking hub through environmental hazards. To his left, the main maintenance corridors provided a direct path if he could neutralize Growl's search teams. The tablet showed Carvac's plasma cutters eating through the sixth quarantine barrier. In the medical bay, Thex calibrated experimental atmospheric regulators around SS Skith's armor. The Iron Fang's engine signature continued building as departure preparations accelerated. Pressure alarms blared as another section of maintenance shaft collapsed behind him. Billy studied the diverging paths ahead as time slipped away, each second bringing the station closer to crisis. The waste reclamation access hatch dripped with condensation, warning indicators showing unstable atmospheric conditions beyond. Through the maintenance corridor, voices echoed as Growl's teams continued their systematic sweep. Billy gripped his tablet, environmental readouts streaming data as he prepared to choose his approach to the docking control hub. Billy gripped the waste reclamation hatch handle, his tablet displaying the advancing positions of Growl's search teams through the maintenance corridor. The dripping condensation and unstable atmospheric readings beyond the hatch presented their own dangers, but less immediate than discovery by the methodical Gorn teams. He twisted the manual release, revealing a narrow passage filled with greenish vapor. His pressure suit's external sensors registered caustic compounds and trace radioactive particles, standard byproducts of the station's waste processing systems. Billy located an emergency oxygen station mounted on the wall, connecting his suit's auxiliary intake to the purified air supply. The system had been installed for cleanup crews dealing with hazardous spills, now serving as his lifeline through the toxic environment. "Weapon pod stabilization complete," Krivax announced through the command channel. "Initiating transfer sequence Alpha 7. Billy's tablet showed the engineer's containment field strengthening around the compromised pods, preparing them for transport to the Iron Fang. The successful stabilization accelerated his timeline. Once those weapons reached the ship, his mission would become exponentially more difficult. Through security feeds, he watched Chief Medical Officer Thex calibrating atmospheric regulators around SS Skith's damaged armor. The Supreme Overlord's scaled features contorted as the experimental devices created unexpected pressure fluctuations within the compromised seals. "Discontinue repairs," Viscsac ordered, watching SS Skith's discomfort. "Transfer him to Iron Fang Medical Bay immediately." Security teams repositioned as Thragak diverted forces to protect SS Skith's route to the ship. The redeployment created gaps in coverage near the diplomatic quarter. Sarah Burns seized the opportunity, accessing local maintenance panels to strengthen the quarantine barriers. Carvac's plasma cutters continued their work, but at a notably slower pace. Billy's tablet pinged with multiple alerts as Laboratory Supervisor Hexa triggered emergency sterilization protocols in the weapon research facilities. Caustic decontamination agents flooded the labs, destroying computer systems containing critical deployment data. Dr. Nex's investigation had pushed the supervisor to desperate measures. Unauthorized modification detected in Section Gamut-12, Maintenance Director Growl transmitted. Full spectrum scan of all maintenance systems authorized. The veteran Gorn engineer had discovered one of Razka's signal scramblers. Billy watched through his tablet as the scan methodically identified and logged unauthorized atmospheric control modifications throughout the station. His carefully constructed network of sabotage points began appearing in Growl's security database. Billy reached a junction in the waste reclamation system, checking his suit's oxygen reserves. The emergency supply remained stable, but the caustic environment had already begun degrading his suit's outer seals. Through the security feed, he observed security specialist Thorax taking command of the Shadowscale teams guarding the docking hub. "Implement Thermal Scanning Protocol 7, Thorax ordered, activating advanced detection systems. Focus on maintenance access points and waste system interfaces." Burns. Myra's voice crackled through his comm. Iron Fang atmospheric processors require full reset during undocking. Auxiliary power only. Window opens in 12 minutes. The temporary vulnerability in the ship's life support systems aligned with SS Skiff's transfer to the medical bay. Billy positioned himself near the maintenance junction's upper access point, calculating approach vectors to the docking control hub. His tablet displayed Thorax's thermal scanners sweeping the surrounding sections in a precise pattern. Warning indicators flashed as the junction's temperature rose. The thermal scanners had detected his presence despite the waste system shielding. Billy watched Shadowscale teams converging on his position through multiple access points, while SS Skiff's transfer continued above. The weapon pods sat ready for transport, and Carvac's cutters breached another quarantine barrier protecting Sarah's position. The caustic atmosphere pressed against his suit's degrading seals as Thorax's forces closed in. Billy accessed the docking control schematics, searching for a route through the Shadowscale's tightening cordon. The Iron Fang's atmospheric reset sequence initiated, starting a countdown that would determine humanity's fate. Billy accessed the waste processing controls through his tablet, overriding safety protocols in adjacent subsystems. Steam burst from ruptured pipes, flooding the surrounding corridors with thick white clouds that obscured the Shadowscale's vision. His suit's external sensors registered the harmless vapor, distinct from the caustic atmosphere still pressing against his degrading seals. Visual contact lost in sections Delta 3 through 7, a Shadowscale reported. Thermal signatures disrupted by environmental anomaly. Through his tablet's feed, Billy watched the team's organized search pattern dissolve into confusion. He located the emergency response shaft entrance, a narrow tube designed for rapid equipment deployment during station fires. The access panel slid open with a hydraulic hiss. Engineering specialist Cracks reporting to docking control. A new voice announced through the command channel. Beginning departure sequence optimization. Billy's tablet displayed the Gorn engineer's arrival from the Iron Fang. Cracks immediately accessed the ship's atmospheric controls, fingers moving across holographic interfaces with practiced efficiency. Initiating override protocols, Cracks transmitted. Standard reset sequence bypassed. Estimated completion, 7 minutes. The maintenance shaft curved upward through sections affected by Vorex's emergency venting. Billy's suit sensors registered near-vacuum conditions in adjacent compartments. He secured his helmet seals and activated magnetic boots to maintain stability against the pressure differentials. Security feeds showed Sarah coordinating with other diplomats, sealing individual chambers throughout their section. Karvak's plasma cutters breached another barrier only to find an empty room with 3 more sealed doorways. "This delays nothing," Karvak growled through the command channel, proceeding with systematic breach pattern. Billy reached a viewport overlooking the cargo tracks. Below, the weapon pods moved steadily toward the Iron Fang's loading bay, their containment fields shimmering under Krivax's stabilization matrix. His tablet calculated their arrival time less than 4 minutes until they reached the ship. Chief Medical Officer Thex's experimental regulators created visible distortions in the air around SS Skith's position. Security systems flickered and failed as the atmospheric interference spread through nearby sections. Billy watched Thorax redistributing shadow-scale teams to compensate for gaps in the thermal scanning network. Multiple containment breaches detected in research sector. Hexa's voice carried artificial panic. Emergency protocols engaging in Labs 3, 7, and 12. Security Chief Thragek's forces split further, teams diverting to investigate the false alerts. Billy reached the docking hub's upper maintenance level, positioning himself above the main control room. Through graded flooring, he observed cracks working to bypass the Iron Fang's atmospheric reset, while shadow-scale guards maintained their positions. The remaining thermal scanners swept across his position in predictable intervals. Billy studied their pattern through his tablet display, noting the precise timing of each pass. Below, Maintenance Director Growl's system scan methodically identified and isolated his atmospheric modifications. Burns. Myra's transmission carried urgency. Krax's override will complete in 3 minutes. Weapon pods reaching final approach to Iron Fang loading bay. Billy checked the feeds from the diplomatic quarter. Sarah's maze of sealed chambers had fragmented Karvak's team, forcing them to breach each room individually. The delay bought precious time, but the demolitions expert steadily advanced toward her position. The thermal scanners completed another pass as Growl's analysis reached the docking section. Billy prepared to breach the control room, watching multiple crisis points converge through his tablet display. The weapon pods approached their final transfer. Krax's fingers flew across control interfaces, and Karvak's plasma cutters pierced another diplomatic chamber. Success would require precise coordination with the Iron Fang's compromised departure sequence. His tablet registered new pressure fluctuations spreading from Thex's experimental regulators. The interference patterns shifted, creating additional instability in the docking hub's security network. Billy positioned himself above a critical junction of atmospheric control systems, waiting for the next thermal scan to pass. The station's damaged infrastructure groaned under continuing stress as he prepared to strike. Billy accessed station emergency protocols through his tablet, fingers dancing across the interface. Warning klaxons blared as cascading pressure alerts erupted throughout adjacent sections. The shadow-scale teams below spun toward their data feeds as multiple hull breach warnings flooded their systems. Investigating breach in section the Tyrant, a shadow-scale commander transmitted. Team 2, divert to Gammafer. Team 3, hold position. Through his tablet, Billy watched Thorax's forces splitting up to investigate the phantom breaches. The security specialist barked orders through the command channel, coordinating responses to threats that existed only in the station's sensor network. A new figure strode into the docking control hub, Weapons Master Hraxix, his crimson armor bearing the Iron Fang's insignia. The munitions expert immediately accessed the weapon pod monitoring systems. Containment field variants detected, Hraxix announced, mandibles clicking in agitation. Initiating supplementary stabilization matrix. Billy's tablet displayed the weapons master's modifications strengthening the pod's protective barriers. The additional security measures threatened to neutralize his planned atmospheric assault. He needed to act before Hraxix could complete the upgrades. Gas deployment authorized in diplomatic sector. Security Chief Thragek's voice crackled through the command channel. Prepare for final breach. Through security feeds, Billy watched knockout gas seeping into the diplomatic quarters. Sarah and the other delegates activated emergency breathing apparatus, but their time was running out. Karvek's plasma cutters carved through the third set of barriers, showering the corridor with molten metal. Below, engineering specialist Krax's fingers flew across holographic interfaces as he bypassed the Iron Fang's atmospheric reset. Power readings spiked as the ship's secondary environmental systems absorbed the redirected energy. The cargo bay's protective shields flickered under the strain. System scan at 70% completion, Maintenance Director Growl reported. Initiating factory reset protocols in affected sections. Billy's carefully constructed network of atmospheric modifications began reverting to standard settings. The maintenance director's countermeasures would eliminate his control over the station's life support within minutes. A harsh grinding sound echoed through the docking hub as the cargo loading system seized. Combat Engineer Krivax's frustrated growl carried through the command channel as two weapon pods sat exposed on the loading platform. Transfer system malfunction, Krivax transmitted. Emergency maintenance required. Estimated delay, 8 minutes. Billy's tablet pinged with an encrypted transmission from Laboratory Supervisor Hexa. Security feeds showed Dr. Nexa's teams breaching her office as she typed frantically. Armor frequency data attached, Hexa transmitted before security forces reached her. Atmospheric regulator vulnerability confirmed. The data download completed moments before Hexa's arrest. Billy integrated the frequency specifications into his atmospheric control interface, creating a precisely calibrated disruption pattern. Supreme Overlord transfer proceeding, Fleet Commander Visksak announced. Clear path to Medical Bay immediately. Billy observed SS Skiff's escort moving through the cargo loading area, passing directly beneath his position. The Gorn leader's damaged armor gleamed under emergency lighting, experimental regulators creating visible distortions in the surrounding air. His fingers moved across the tablet's interface, initiating a complex sequence of atmospheric manipulations. The docking hub's environmental systems responded instantly, generating precisely targeted pressure waves that rippled through 3 crucial areas simultaneously. Security Specialist Thorax's head snapped toward his control panel as system alerts flooded his display. Unauthorized access detected. Initiating emergency, lock out all environmental controls. Shadowscale teams converged on the hub's upper maintenance level as Billy's attack sequence reached critical threshold. Thorax's lockout protocols began systematically severing his connections to station systems, while Growl's reset countdown continued its relentless advance. Through his tablet, Billy watched the synchronized atmospheric assault unfold. The cargo bay's overloaded shields wavered under precisely modulated pressure waves. On the loading platform, exposed weapon pods registered mounting atmospheric stress against their containment fields. And in the transfer corridor, SS Skiff's escort stumbled as carefully calibrated frequency patterns interfered with the Supreme Overlord's regulator systems. Warning indicators flashed across Billy's display as Thorax's lockout reached the primary environmental controls. Above the pounding of shadowscale boots on metal grating, he heard the hiss of pressure doors sealing throughout the hub. His connection to station systems deteriorated while security teams closed in on his position from multiple directions. Billy's fingers raced across his tablet interface as security teams closed in. He initiated a cascading sequence of atmospheric manipulations, targeting 3 critical systems simultaneously. The pressure wave hit SS Skiff's escort first, disrupting the experimental regulators. The Supreme Overlord's damaged armor sparked and hissed as precisely calibrated frequencies interfered with its compromised seals. Regulator malfunction detected. One of SS Skith's guards transmitted. Armor integrity declining. The second wave struck the exposed weapon pods. Their containment fields fluctuated under the strain as Billy directed a focused stream of high-pressure atmosphere against their vulnerable sections. Combat engineer Krivax rushed to extend the Iron Fang's shields around the loading platform. Initiating shield harmonics extension, Krivax announced, compensating for atmospheric interference. The engineer's modification collided with Krax's power bypass, creating an electromagnetic resonance that rippled through both systems. Shield emitters whined as the conflicting frequencies threatened to overload their capacitors. Billy diverted emergency power to maintain control of crucial atmospheric processors as Thorax's lockout protocols spread through the hub. Non-essential systems went dark around him, creating a pattern of failures that masked his primary attack vector. Through his tablet, he watched the Iron Fang's cargo bay shields waver under precisely targeted pressure differentials. Multiple system failures detected, Thorax reported. Isolating compromised sections, security teams converge on upper maintenance level. In the diplomatic quarter, Sarah's voice came through clearly despite the knockout gas flooding their section. Emergency Protocol 7 activated. All delegates, seal pressure suits immediately. Security feeds showed the diplomats donning emergency evacuation gear, protecting themselves from Thragak's gas attack. Their oxygen supplies would be limited, but the defensive measure bought precious time. Weapons Master Hraxix's additional security protocols interacted unexpectedly with the compromised cargo bay shields. Power surged through the Iron Fang's distribution network, forcing Krax to temporarily disable his atmospheric bypass. Shield harmonics destabilizing, Krivax transmitted. Unable to maintain extension around weapon pods. Evacuate all non-essential personnel from affected sections, Fleet Commander Viskzak ordered. Priority transfer of remaining pods. The evacuation order created chaos in the loading procedures. Crew members rushed to secure equipment while attempting to coordinate the emergency transfer. The exposed pods remained vulnerable to Billy's atmospheric assault. Maintenance Director Growl's system reset reached the docking section's primary controls. Billy watched his access to atmospheric systems diminish as factory settings restored one by one. He faced an impossible choice: maintain pressure on SS Skith's failing armor or prevent the weapon pod's transfer. Final barrier breach in progress, Thragak announced from the diplomatic quarter. Prepare for capture. The security chief's triumphant tone shifted to confusion as automated quarantine protocols engaged. Hexa's earlier manipulation triggered emergency decontamination procedures, creating a temporary barrier between the security forces and their targets. Unexpected quarantine activation, Thragak growled. Override codes ineffective. Billy directed the last of his controlled atmosphere against SS Skith's regulators as shadow-scale teams reached his position. The Supreme Overlord's armor sparked violently, experimental systems failing under the precisely modulated assault. Below, engineering specialist Krax worked frantically to restore his bypass of the Iron Fang's atmospheric reset. Through his tablet's final active feeds, Billy observed Sarah's oxygen supply reaching critical levels, while the exposed weapon pods inched closer to transfer. Thorax's lockout protocols had isolated him from most station systems, and Growl's reset continued eliminating his remaining access. The pounding of shadow-scale boots grew louder as they converged on his position from multiple directions. Billy directed his remaining atmospheric controls toward SS Skith's position, abandoning peripheral systems as Thorax's lockout protocols tightened their grip. The Supreme Overlord's damaged armor sparked and crackled under the concentrated assault. Through his tablet's dimming display, he initiated a cascading depressurization sequence targeting the cargo handling systems. Multiple pressure anomalies detected. Navigation Officer Vex transmitted from the Iron Fang's bridge. Artificial gravity fluctuations spreading through forward sections. The ship's gravity fields wavered, interacting with Krax's power bypass to create unstable zones throughout the cargo bay. Loading mechanisms groaned under the combined stress of atmospheric interference and gravitational distortion. Reducing shield power to compensate, Krax announced. Cargo bay defenses at 60% capacity. Combat engineer Krivax rushed to accelerate the weapon transfer, his movements hampered by the fluctuating gravity. Increasing transfer speed to clear exposure window. The loading system's servos whined in protest as two weapon pods jammed in the transfer mechanism. Warning indicators flashed across Krivax's console as containment field integrity dropped into critical ranges. Through the diplomatic quarters security feeds, Billy watched Sarah accessing station protocols through her credentials. Emergency decontamination cycles activated in surrounding corridors, trapping Thragx security teams in sealed chambers. Decontamination lockdown unauthorized, Thragx snarled through the command channel. Override codes ineffective. Maintenance Director Growl's system reset reached the hub's primary environmental controls. As factory settings restored, the process collided with Hex's sabotage protocols. Cascading failures spread through the life support network, triggering emergency warnings across multiple decks. Station stability compromised, Station Administrator Vorex announced. Initiating emergency containment procedures. The docking clamps locked into safety position, preventing the Iron Fang's departure. Fleet Commander Viskzak's voice carried notes of tension as he addressed the mounting crisis. All non-essential personnel, evacuate affected sections immediately. Security teams maintain positions. Crew members rushed through corridors as evacuation alerts competed with security lockdown signals. The weapon transfer platform sat abandoned except for Krivax's team, working frantically to free the jammed pods. Chief Medical Officer Thex's experimental regulators overloaded under the mounting pressure differentials. The feedback surge hit SS Skith's armor systems, causing environmental seals to fail in rapid succession. The Supreme Overlord stumbled, scaled hands clutching at malfunctioning control interfaces. Medical emergency, one of SS Skith's guards transmitted. Leader's vital signs destabilizing. Billy concentrated his remaining atmospheric access into a precisely calculated pressure wave. The attack struck simultaneously at SS Skith's failing armor and the exposed weapon pods. Containment fields flickered dangerously as the pressure differential peaked. Pattern identified, Security Specialist Thorax announced. Implementing atmospheric stabilization protocols. Full restoration in 3 minutes. The pounding of shadow-scale boots grew louder as security teams breached the outer maintenance level. Billy's tablet displayed multiple breach points as armed forces converged on his position. Through failing security feeds, he watched Sarah's oxygen supply indicators dropping toward critical levels, while the jammed weapon pods edged closer to containment failure. The docking hub's infrastructure creaked under the strain of competing system failures. Warning klaxons blared as Thorax's countermeasures began pushing back against Billy's atmospheric assault. His connection to crucial processors weakened with each passing second as the security specialist algorithms restored stability to affected sections. SS Skith's escort team halted their advance, forming a protective circle around their leader as his armor's life support systems deteriorated. The weapon pod's containment fields pulsed erratically, their status indicators shifting from yellow to red. Above the chaos of evacuation alerts and security warnings, the sound of shadow-scale forces breaching the final barrier echoed through the maintenance shaft. Billy's fingers danced across his tablet interface, redirecting power from the failing atmospheric processors into the cargo loading systems. The resulting feedback loop surged through the docking hub's infrastructure, striking both targets simultaneously. SS Skiff's compromised armor sparked violently as emergency indicators flashed across the weapon pod's status displays. Critical power fluctuation detected, Combat Engineer Krivax transmitted. Attempting emergency containment field extension. The field generators whined as Krivax fought to establish a stable containment barrier around the jammed weapon pods. Unstable gravity waves from the Iron Fang collided with the forming fields, creating rippling distortions that stressed the pod's structural integrity. Warning lights shifted from amber to red as containment readings dropped into critical ranges. Two pods showing imminent structural failure, Krivax reported, unable to maintain field cohesion under current conditions. Thorax's atmospheric countermeasures activated throughout the affected sections, but the algorithms collided unexpectedly with Vorex's emergency protocols. Ventilation systems throughout the docking hub initiated emergency shutdown sequences, triggering rapid depressurization warnings across multiple decks. Atmospheric processors failing, a technician announced. Pressure dropping in sectors 7 through 12. Maintenance technician Xylax rushed to his control station, activating auxiliary life support units to restore stability. The power surge from his intervention cascaded through the compromised systems, amplifying the effect of Billy's assault on SS Skiff's armor. The Supreme Overlord stumbled as his environmental seals failed in rapid succession. Leader's vital signs critical, one of SS Skiff's guards transmitted. Immediate evacuation required. In the diplomatic quarter, Sarah's manipulation of quarantine protocols forced Thragak to divide his security forces. Teams of armed personnel scattered across multiple decks, responding to system failures while maintaining containment around the diplomatic delegation. Unable to coordinate effective response, Thragak growled through the command channel. Security coverage insufficient for multiple crisis points. The Iron Fang's emergency bulkhead struggled against Krax's power bypass, trapping engineering crews in rapidly depressurizing compartments. Fleet Commander Viskzak's voice carried notes of urgency as he addressed the mounting crisis. Engineering teams, restore bulkhead functionality immediately. Departure sequence suspended until compartments are secured. Weapons Master Hraxix analyzed the weapon pod's deteriorating status, identifying critical vulnerabilities in their containment systems. Initiating emergency stabilization procedures. Protective shielding must be temporarily deactivated. The pod's shields flickered and died as Hraxix implemented his stabilization sequence. Exposed to the mounting environmental pressures, their structural integrity readings plummeted toward failure thresholds. Billy watched through failing security feeds as SS Skiff's guard attempted to evacuate their leader. The malfunctioning gravity systems sent them stumbling through corridors as emergency klaxons blared overhead. Their movement slowed with each failing atmospheric seal. Shadowscale teams breached the outer defenses of the docking control hub, advancing cautiously through depressurizing sections. Billy triggered controlled decompressions in their path, forcing them to secure their equipment against the shifting environmental conditions. Multiple breach points detected, a Shadowscale commander transmitted. Proceeding with atmospheric gear active. Maintenance Director Growl's system reset continued its relentless advance through station systems. Billy's access to crucial controls vanished one by one as factory settings restored. Through his tablet's dimming display, he coordinated a final assault on his targets. The combined stress of failing gravity fields, atmospheric manipulation, and power surges struck SS Skiff's position simultaneously. The Supreme Overlord's experimental regulators overloaded completely, sending cascading failures through his armor's remaining functional systems. At the same moment, the weapon pod's compromised seals buckled under the mounting environmental pressure. Emergency indicators flashed across Krivex's console as containment readings dropped toward critical failure points. The pounding of shadow-scale boots grew louder as Billy directed the last of his controlled atmospheric processors toward their final targets. Security feeds showed both SS Skiff's failing armor and the destabilizing weapon pods approaching catastrophic breakdown. As Growl's reset eliminated his remaining system, access one connection at a time. A thunderous crack echoed through the cargo bay as the first weapon pod's containment seal ruptured. Emergency klaxons screamed warnings as the atmospheric processor's erratic fluctuations created a destructive resonance pattern. The second pod's structural integrity failed microseconds later, its contents dispersing into the unstable atmosphere. Pods 3 and 7 breached, Krivax transmitted, his voice tight with controlled panic. Containment failure complete. Contents exposed to atmospheric degradation. The caustic hiss of failing seals pierced the air as SS Skiff's armor systems entered terminal collapse. The Supreme Overlord's scaled form crumpled to the deck, environment regulators sparking uselessly. His honor guard rushed forward, protective gear struggling against the deteriorating atmospheric conditions. "Leader down," the guard captain barked. "Emergency extraction required." Fleet Commander Viskzak's voice cut through the chaos. "Initiate emergency launch sequence. Maximum thrust on primary engines." "Sir, power systems are critically unstable," Krax protested. "Engine activation could trigger, execute immediately." The Iron Fang's engines roared to life, overwhelming the compromised power grid. Electrical discharges arced across cargo handling equipment as system after system overloaded. The remaining weapon pods, suspended in their transfer cradles, bathed in waves of uncontrolled electromagnetic radiation. "Containment degrading on all remaining units," Hraxix reported. "Radiation exposure exceeding safety parameters." In the diplomatic quarter, Thragek's security teams breached the final barrier only to halt their advance. Their sensors detected the delegates' pressure suits drawing oxygen from concealed emergency reserves. "Unexpected life support configuration detected," Thragek transmitted. "Unable to proceed without violating diplomatic protocols." A new voice cut across the command channel. Emergency Response Coordinator Thaxix assuming crisis authority, initiating station-wide containment procedures. Blast doors slammed shut throughout the facility as Thaxix's protocols activated. Warning indicators flashed across Billy's tablet as escape routes vanished one by one. Krivax's desperate attempt to stabilize the transfer system backfired spectacularly. Power surged from the Iron Fang's secondary systems into the failing gravity generators, creating a destructive feedback loop. Metal screamed as the docking clamps twisted under immense structural stress. "Docking mechanism compromised," Navigation Officer Vex announced. "Emergency departure sequence aborted." Billy directed his remaining atmospheric controls with surgical precision, creating a corridor of unstable pressure that prevented SS Skiff's guard from reaching nearby emergency chambers. The Supreme Overlord's scaled form lay motionless as his escort struggled against the environmental assault. The sound of cutting torches filled the maintenance shaft as shadow-scale teams breached the inner defenses. Thaxix's containment protocols sealed additional corridors with each passing second. Security Specialist Thorax's voice carried notes of triumph. "Target located. Convergence in 3 sectors." Billy's tablet displayed Sarah's oxygen reserves holding steady, while the Iron Fang's weapon pods remained trapped in their degrading transfer cradles. His sister was safe for now, and half the biological weapons were neutralized, but completing the mission would require maintaining control over critical systems, even as his access points vanished one by one. The maintenance shaft's final barrier began to glow red as shadow-scale cutting tools bit into the metal. Emergency bulkheads descended around the docking control hub, each one reducing Billy's options for escape. Through failing security feeds, he watched Thaxix coordinate a systematic response to the cascading failures while Thurax's teams closed in from multiple directions. His tablet indicated only minutes remained before Growl's reset eliminated his remaining system access. Every second counted as he worked to leverage his control over the atmospheric processors into a final decisive advantage. Billy's fingers flew across the docking control hub's primary interface, channeling power from the failing atmospheric processors into a concentrated burst. The resulting pressure differential struck SS Skith's position with devastating precision. Emergency indicators flashed as the Supreme Overlord's compromised armor systems cascaded into total failure. "Medical emergency," the guard captain transmitted. "Leader's life support offline. Evacuating to emergency pod Alpha." The honor guard dragged SS Skith's unconscious form through destabilized corridors toward the nearest medical station. Their boots scraped against deck plating as environmental systems continued to fluctuate wildly. Within minutes, the medical pod's automated systems engaged, stabilizing the Supreme Overlord's vital signs but leaving him incapacitated. Combat Coordinator Zrixak assuming tactical command. A new voice cut through the command channel. "All security teams, implement containment pattern Delta." Through his tablet's display, Billy watched as the Iron Fang's elite security commander reorganized the scattered response teams. Shadow-scale units split into smaller tactical groups, advancing methodically through the maintenance networks while station security established blocking positions at key junctions. In the cargo bay, Weapons Master Hraxix initiated emergency containment procedures on the remaining weapon pods, routing auxiliary power to stabilization fields. Be advised, system stress critical. The Iron Fang's power grid surged as additional energy flowed into the containment systems. Circuit breakers triggered across multiple decks, plunging entire sections into darkness. Emergency lighting cast red shadows across sealed corridors where engineering teams found themselves trapped behind malfunctioning bulkheads. "Engineering to command," a technician called. "Unable to reach critical systems. Backup power insufficient for bulkhead override." Sarah's voice transmitted through a secure channel. "Billy, I've found something. The diplomatic quarters quarantine systems have an emergency override." Her manipulation of the decontamination protocols created barriers of sanitization fields throughout adjacent sections. Security Chief Thragek's teams recoiled as automated systems showered them with decontamination agents. "Unable to maintain position," Thragek reported. "Diplomatic security compromised by environmental hazards." Combat Engineer Krivax's voice carried notes of urgency. "Sir, we need to reset the cargo transfer grid. It's our only option for pod stabilization." "Reset would disable all safety protocols," Fleet Commander Viskzak responded. "Decompression risk too high. Alternative is total weapon loss, sir. Grid showing cascade failure in progress." The docking mechanism groaned as power fluctuations from engineering specialist Krax's stabilization attempts created additional structural stress. Metal screamed as the clamps twisted further, locking the Iron Fang against the station's hull. "Navigation to command," Officer Vex transmitted. "Docking clamps critically compromised. Ship unable to detach." Billy accessed the hub's primary atmospheric controls, creating zones of unstable pressure that forced security teams to constantly adjust their equipment. Zrixak's voice remained steady as he coordinated the response. "Teams 2 and 4, converge on hub access point Beta. Team 3, maintain pressure on maintenance shaft approach." The hub's outer defenses buckled as shadow-scale cutting tools breached protective panels. Emergency bulkheads descended with pneumatic hisses, each barrier reducing Billy's available escape routes. Through security feeds, he watched Zrixak's forces establish a precise containment pattern around his position. "Target contained," Zrixak transmitted, proceeding with final breach sequence. The station's automated systems continued implementing Thaxix's containment protocols, sealing entire sections in response to the spreading chaos. Billy's tablet displayed rapidly diminishing system access as sealed barriers trapped him in an increasingly confined space. Shadow-scale breaching charges detonated against the hub's reinforced doors. The sound of cutting torches filled the confined space as Billy directed the last remnants of his atmospheric control toward protecting critical systems. His sister's oxygen reserves remained stable, and half the biological weapons were neutralized, but completing the mission would require maintaining control long enough to destroy the remaining pods. Zrixak's voice transmitted once more. "All teams in position, commencing final assault." Billy's fingers flew across the hub's control interface, initiating an emergency purge of the primary atmospheric circulation system. Pressure readings spiked beyond safety parameters as waves of compressed air rushed through the station's ventilation network. The sudden atmospheric surge struck Zrixak's assault teams with crushing force, sending armored shadowscales staggering back from their breach positions. "Atmospheric anomaly detected," a technician reported. "Pressure differentials exceeding design limits." The unstable air currents interacted with the Iron Fang's compromised power grid. Electrical discharges arced through the docking section as system after system crashed. Warning indicators flashed across engineering displays throughout the vessel. In engineering control, engineering assistant Lyra analyzed the pattern of cascading failures. Her scaled fingers traced familiar pathways across diagnostic screens as she recognized the distinctive signature of maintenance protocols she had helped implement. Without transmitting her observations, she began rerouting power through auxiliary circuits. Detecting unexpected power fluctuations, Combat Engineer Krivax announced, attempting to compensate. Krivax's adjustment to the cargo transfer system backfired as surge protectors failed. Raw power flooded through the distribution network, overwhelming the weapon pod's environmental shields. 2 more containment units flickered and died, their contents rendered inert by exposure to the unstable atmosphere. Pods 4 and 6 neutralized, Weapons Master Hraxix transmitted. 3 units remain viable. Emergency Medical Officer Rika's voice cut through the command channel. "Medical priority alert. Supreme Overlord's condition critical. Advanced treatment required immediately." The female specialist's diagnostic readings showed Skith's vital signs deteriorating despite the emergency pod's intervention. Fleet Commander Vixak received her data stream with visible tension. "Understood," Vixak responded. "Prepare for emergency transfer to ship's medical bay." In the diplomatic quarter, Security Chief Thragek's teams finally breached the delegate's oxygen supply. Sarah's voice remained steady as she activated her contingency. "Initiating Protocol 7, she transmitted to Billy. "Stand by." Ancient compressors roared to life, flooding the diplomatic section with dense atmosphere. Thragek's forces retreated as pressure readings exceeded their equipment's tolerances. "Unable to maintain position," Thragek reported, requesting specialized environmental gear. Combat Coordinator Zrixak adjusted his strategy. Infiltration Specialist Krax deployed to Section 3, priority target. Atmospheric control nodes. Krax's acknowledgement was followed by methodical progress through the station's maintenance tubes. One by one, the atmospheric processors under Billy's control went dark as the specialists severed their connections. Engineering Specialist Krax's voice carried notes of alarm. "Sir, Docking clamp stress exceeding structural limits. Metal shrieked as the primary clamps failed. The iron fangs shuddered, trapped against the station's hull without proper atmospheric seals. Warning klaxons blared as pressure differences threatened to rupture the compromised connection points. Ship status, locked, Navigation Officer Vex announced. Unable to establish safe transfer corridors. Billy directed the remaining atmospheric processors with calculated precision. Each adjustment threatened both the damaged docking seals and the surviving weapon pods. Engineering Assistant Lyra's covert power routing preserved his control over key systems even as others failed. Emergency Response Coordinator Thaxix's voice remained clinical, implementing backup life support protocols. Estimated time to full atmospheric stabilization, 15 minutes. Infiltration Specialist Krax's progress through the environmental systems accelerated. Billy watched through failing security feeds as processor after processor went offline. His tablet displayed Lyra's auxiliary connections, providing access to a dwindling number of systems. The sound of cutting tools resumed as Zrix's forces prepared to breach the hub's final defenses. Billy accessed the remaining atmospheric controls, knowing each adjustment could determine the fate of the 3 surviving weapon pods trapped aboard the crippled Iron Fang. Billy's eyes darted across the hub's displays as Lyra's power redirections created an unexpected pattern in the docking system diagnostics. The compromised connection points flashed red, each warning indicator revealing structural weaknesses in the damaged clamps. Through the security feeds, he observed Engineering Assistant Lyra's scaled fingers dancing across her control panel. Her subtle manipulations of the power grid had maintained his access far longer than expected. Now, those same adjustments exposed a critical vulnerability in the Iron Fang's compromised docking mechanism. Billy channeled power from the remaining atmospheric processors into a precise sequence. Waves of pressure struck the weakened connection points, metal groaning as the differentials attacked already strained structural supports. Alert, Navigation Officer Vex transmitted, detecting critical stress patterns in primary docking assembly. Fleet Commander Visxak's response carried undertones of tension. Suspend weapon pod transfer operations. Divert power to structural reinforcement. A new figure strode onto the engineering deck, portable equipment slung across his armored shoulders. Structural Integrity Officer Nexus reporting. Beginning emergency stabilization procedures. Nexus deployed field generators around the failing docking clamps. Energy fields materialized, creating localized reinforcement zones that began counteracting the atmospheric assault. Billy watched through the feeds as the specialist's expertise threatened to neutralize his attack on the connection points. Combat Coordinator Zrix's voice cut through the command channel. Atmospheric Specialist Vrax, deploy specialized countermeasures. Neutralize environmental hazards around hub access points. A heavily equipped figure advanced through the corridors, carrying technology Billy had never encountered. Vrax activated his gear, projecting fields of atmospheric stability that carved paths through the pressure barriers. Security teams followed in his wake, protected from the environmental defenses. Atmospheric normalization in progress, Vrax reported. Detecting source nodes for pressure anomalies. In the diplomatic quarter, Sarah's voice transmitted through their secure channel, security teams deploying portable processors, losing containment of pressurized zones. Security Chief Thragak coordinated his forces' advance. Continue atmospheric normalization. Prepare for final breach of delegate containment. Warning, Sarah broadcast suddenly. Critical radiation detected in diplomatic sectors. Emergency protocols require immediate evacuation. Thragak's teams halted their advance as warning indicators flashed. Fall back to safe zones. Await radiation containment verification. The Iron Fang's cargo bay systems flashed with new warnings as engineering specialist Krax's stabilization attempts created unexpected interactions. Power surged through the containment fields protecting the remaining weapon pods. Field integrity failing, Combat Engineer Krivax announced. Must choose between pod preservation and ship systems. Emergency Medical Officer Rika's voice carried notes of urgency. Supreme Overlord's transfer route compromised. Pod life support showing critical instability. Billy tracked SS Skith's medical pod through the security feeds as it diverted through sections affected by atmospheric manipulation. The Supreme Overlord's vital signs fluctuated dangerously with each environmental variation. Infiltration Specialist Krax continued methodically disabling atmospheric processors. Node 7 offline, proceeding to final control sectors. Engineering Assistant Lyra's voice transmitted on an engineering channel, detecting anomalous patterns in containment backup systems, initiating diagnostic sequence. Her careful wording masked the activation of auxiliary environmental controls. Billy's tablet displayed new access points as ancient emergency systems came online. He directed power through these backup channels, focusing the remaining atmospheric processors on both the Iron Fang's compromised docking clamps and SS Skith's vulnerable transfer route. The hub's final defenses buckled as atmospheric specialist Vrax's technology neutralized the last pressure barriers. Combat Coordinator Z-Rixak's forces converged on the control center, cutting tools carving through reinforced panels. Target area secured, Vrax transmitted. Proceeding with atmospheric normalization. Billy's fingers flew across the interface as he executed his attack through the auxiliary systems. Time raced against him as Krax's methodical advance threatened to eliminate his remaining control. Through failing security feeds, he watched Z-Rixak's forces breach the final barriers protecting his position. The sounds of cutting tools filled the confined space as Billy directed every remaining scrap of power into his risky move. Pressure readings spiked beyond safety tolerances as waves of compressed air struck both the Iron Fang's docking assembly and SS Skith's medical pod simultaneously. Metal screamed as the docking clamps twisted under the atmospheric assault. Warning klaxons blared throughout the station as system after system crashed. The station's automated containment protocols activated, emergency bulkheads descending to isolate the growing chaos. The emergency bulkhead slammed downward as Billy directed a concentrated burst of atmospheric pressure through his dwindling processor network. Metal groaned under the assault as the Iron Fang's compromised docking clamps absorbed wave after wave of compressed air. 3 thunderous cracks echoed through the station's hull as primary connection points failed in rapid succession. The massive vessel lurched sideways, emergency thrusters firing to maintain position as half its docking clamps tore free. Multiple structural failures detected, Navigation Officer Vex transmitted. Docking assembly integrity at 30%. Structural Integrity Officer Nexus deployed additional field generators around the surviving clamps. Energy fields hummed to life, straining to reinforce the weakened connection points. Seconds later, the portable units overloaded in brilliant flashes of light. Cascading power surges raced through the docking ring's emergency systems, leaving dead circuits and failed stabilizers in their wake. A new voice cut through the command channel. Power Systems Controller Vrax responding to critical infrastructure failure, implementing emergency conservation protocols. Station systems began shutting down one by one as Vrax diverted power to essential life support. Billy's access to auxiliary environmental controls flickered as the conservation protocols spread through the grid. Through his security feeds, Billy watched engineering assistant Lyra's fingers dance across her diagnostic panel. Text flashed across his tablet. Emergency pressure release system detected. Original construction. Access granted. He activated the ancient protocols just as SS Skith's medical transfer team reached an exposed corridor section. Pressure seals ruptured in sequence, creating a controlled wave of decompression that forced the transfer team back from their vulnerable position. Medical transfer route compromised, Emergency Medical Officer Rika announced. Supreme Overlord's pod experiencing critical fluctuations. Atmospheric Specialist Vrax's stabilization fields carved through Billy's remaining environmental defenses as Zrix's forces breached the outer walls of the docking control hub. The specialist's technology projected bubbles of normalized atmosphere that allowed security teams to advance through the pressure barriers. Hub perimeter secured, Vrax transmitted. Proceeding with final neutralization. In the cargo bay, combat engineer Krivax struggled to maintain containment around the surviving weapon pods. Power surges from the damaged docking assembly created interference patterns in their atmospheric seals. Warning indicators flashed as 2 more pods began losing containment integrity. Pods 3 and 5 showing critical instability, Krivax reported. Only Pod 2 remains viable. Fleet Commander Viskzak received a priority alert from Emergency Medical Officer Rika. The female specialist's data stream showed SS Skith's life support systems failing under the continued atmospheric assault. Supreme Overlord requires immediate stabilization, Rika transmitted. Current position becoming unsustainable. Viskzak's response carried urgency. Status of emergency evacuation route. Negative, Navigation Officer Vex replied. Docking connection unsuitable for safe transfer. Billy directed another burst of pressure through the ancient release system, targeting both the remaining weapon pod and SS Skith's deteriorating life support. His tablet display flickered as Power Systems Controller Vrax's conservation protocols eliminated more auxiliary systems. Through the fatting security feeds, he watched infiltration specialist Krax disable the final primary atmospheric processors. The specialist moved with mechanical precision, severing power and control connections to each unit in sequence. Atmospheric control grid offline, Krax reported. Proceeding to auxiliary systems. Billy's access to environmental controls narrowed as Vrax's protocols spread through the station's power grid. Zrix's forces established firing positions around the hub's perimeter, while Vrax's technology continued neutralizing the remaining pressure barriers. The Iron Fang's partial separation had bought precious minutes, but Billy's options dwindled with each lost system. His tablet showed Lyra's covert connections failing one by one as the emergency conservation measures expanded through the network. The ancient pressure release system remained his last viable weapon against both the surviving pod and SS Skith's vulnerable medical transport. Combat Coordinator Zrix's voice transmitted clearly through the thinning atmosphere. Final breach commencing in 3 minutes. Prepare for synchronized assault. Billy accessed the pressure release controls, knowing his next move would determine the outcome of both critical targets. Through the dying security feeds, he watched the final weapon pod's containment field fluctuate, while SS Skith's medical pod readings continued their dangerous decline. Billy directed a surge of power through the ancient pressure release controls, targeting the Iron Fang's remaining docking clamps. The auxiliary environmental systems groaned under the strain as waves of compressed air hammered the weakened connection points. 2 thunderous cracks reverberated through the station's hull. The massive vessel lurched violently as additional primary clamps tore free, leaving it tethered by a single stabilization point. Emergency thrusters fired continuously, their blue exhaust illuminating the station's hull as the ship's systems fought to maintain position. Warning, Navigation Officer Vex transmitted. Critical structural failure. Primary docking assembly at minimal integrity. Atmospheric disturbances rippled through the surrounding sections. Security teams staggered as their environment suits activated emergency seals against the pressure fluctuations. Engineering crews scrambled to deploy protective gear as oxygen levels plummeted. A new figure hurried through the chaos, portable equipment clutched in her arms. Life support systems engineer Thylax responding to critical environmental breach. The female Gorn specialist activated filtration units at key junctions. Stable atmospheric corridors materialized, creating protected routes through the affected areas. Security teams advanced through these passages as Thylax's equipment hummed, struggling to maintain atmospheric integrity against Billy's continued assault through the auxiliary systems. Deploying breach specialist Crix, Combat Coordinator Zrixak announced. Commence synchronized penetration of hub defenses. A heavily armored figure stepped forward, specialized cutting equipment extending from his suit's hardpoints. Energy fields sparked around the tools as they activated, designed specifically for operation in unstable atmospheric conditions. The equipment's cutting beams sliced through the hub's outer barriers with mechanical precision. Through the security feeds, Billy watched Fleet Commander Viskzak redirect SS Skith's medical transport towards secondary transfer tubes. The Supreme Overlord's vital signs fluctuated dangerously on the medical readouts. Billy's tablet displayed Lyra's transmitted access codes. His fingers flew across the interface, activating ancient decontamination protocols. Caustic sterilization gases flooded the backup routes, forcing the medical team to halt their advance. Transfer tubes compromised, Emergency Medical Officer Rika reported. Supreme Overlord requires immediate stabilization. Current route non-viable. Power Systems Controller Vrax's conservation protocol spread through the station's grid, eliminating systems in calculated sequence. In the cargo bay, the final weapon pod's containment fields fluctuated as power surges disrupted their atmospheric seals. Pod stability critical, Combat Engineer Krivax transmitted. Attempting emergency power transfer from life support. The diplomatic quarters security feeds showed Thragx forces falling back from their positions. Pressure waves from the compromised docking section struck their protective gear, creating hairline cracks in their visors. Unable to maintain position, Thragx announced. Atmospheric hazards exceeding suit tolerances. Sarah's voice cut through the command channel. Diplomatic security protocols engaged. Emergency containment active. Billy tracked SS Skith's medical pod through deteriorating security feeds. The transport team struggled through sections affected by his atmospheric manipulation. Warning indicators flashed as the Supreme Overlord's life support systems faltered. Breach specialist Crix's cutting beams carved deeper into the hub's defenses. Sparks cascaded through the thinning atmosphere as reinforced panels gave way. Life support systems engineer Thylax deployed additional filtration units, expanding the stable corridors that allowed security forces to advance. Billy's access to auxiliary systems narrowed as Vrax's protocols eliminated more control nodes. His tablet displayed critical warnings as power failed across the station. Through the remaining feeds, he watched the final weapon pod's containment field fluctuate, while SS Skith's vital signs continued their dangerous descent. The hub's outer barriers buckled under Crix's assault. Cutting beams sliced through the last layers of reinforcement as Thylax's atmospheric corridors brought the security teams within striking distance. Billy accessed the dwindling auxiliary controls, knowing his remaining moves would determine the fate of both critical targets. Billy's fingers darted across his control interface, redirecting every scrap of remaining auxiliary power into the Iron Fang's final docking connection. The hub systems protested as energy surged through failing circuits. Metal groaned under the increasing strain as his audacious attempt pushed the clamp's structural integrity beyond its limits. A thunderous crack split the air. The massive vessel's emergency thrusters fired at full power as the last connection point failed catastrophically. Billy watched through deteriorating security feeds as the Iron Fang executed emergency separation protocols, its bulk slowly drifting away from the damaged docking ring. Alert uncontrolled orbital drift imminent, Navigation Officer Vex transmitted. Initiating stabilization sequence. A new figure appeared in the command channel. Damage Control Officer Nixus responding to critical hull breach. The male Gorn specialist's rapid seal foam barriers expanded across the damaged sections, hardening instantly as they contacted the station's hull. Atmospheric sensors registered localized stability as the barriers contained the decompression, but the foam's rapid spread trapped security teams in multiple sections. Unable to advance, Thragak transmitted. Containment barriers blocking access to primary targets. In the Iron Fang's cargo bay, warning indicators flashed as the ship's stabilization sequence disrupted power to critical systems. Combat engineer Krivex's readings showed the final weapon pod's containment field generators failing. Pod exposure critical, Krivex reported. Seals degrading under vacuum conditions. Radiation levels increasing from destabilized field generators. Billy's tablet displayed an urgent transmission from Lyra. Her analysis highlighted a vulnerability in the station's original fire suppression network. With precise keystrokes, he accessed the medical transfer tube controls, reprogramming the emergency systems to disperse corrosive coolant instead of fire retardant. The acrid spray filled the transfer tubes just as SS Skith's evacuation team attempted to advance. Their environment suit's external sensors registered immediate chemical damage. Transfer route compromised, Emergency Medical Officer Rika announced. Supreme Overlord experiencing severe respiratory failure, vital signs critical. Through the security feeds, Billy watched SS Skith's personal guard retreat from the coolant-filled corridors. The Supreme Overlord's medical readings continued their dangerous descent as his damaged armor failed to compensate for the unstable conditions. Security Chief Thragak's forces deployed portable atmospheric processors, attempting to create a stable approach to the diplomatic quarter. Sarah's voice cut through the command channel as emergency bulkheads slammed into place, isolating the security teams between sealed sections. Diplomatic quarter lockdown complete, she transmitted. Radiation containment protocols engaged. Combat Coordinator Z-Rixak directed his forces through the chaos. Specialist Vrax deploy experimental stabilization fields. Neutralize remaining environmental defenses around the hub. The experimental technology hummed to life, projecting invisible barriers that began counteracting Billy's atmospheric manipulation. Breach Specialist Crix's cutting beams carved deeper into the hub's outer defenses as the stabilization fields cleared their path. Dangerous pressure waves rippled through the compromised sections as the experimental fields interacted with damaged atmospheric processors. Security teams staggered as their environment suits struggled to compensate for the fluctuating conditions. Warning! Life support systems, Engineer Thylax transmitted. Field harmonics creating unstable pressure gradients. Unable to maintain atmospheric corridors. Billy's access to auxiliary systems narrowed further as more critical failures cascaded through the station's power grid. The security feeds showed Crix's cutting equipment penetrating the hub's outer barriers, while Vrax's experimental fields continued neutralizing his remaining defenses. Through the deteriorating camera network, he tracked the Iron Fang's final weapon pod as its containment systems failed. The biological agent inside became exposed to the harsh vacuum of space, its carefully maintained environmental seals rupturing under the combined effects of radiation and extreme conditions. Emergency Medical Officer Rika's transmissions carried increasing urgency as SS Skith's vital signs reached critical levels. The Supreme Overlord's personal guard attempted to establish an evacuation route through maintenance corridors, but streams of corrosive coolant from the reprogrammed fire suppression system forced them back. The docking control hub systems continued failing around Billy as Crix's cutting beams sliced through the last layers of reinforcement. Vrax's experimental pressure fields pressed inward, their unexpected interaction with the damaged atmospheric processors creating waves of destructive energy that threatened both attackers and defender alike. Billy registered the final outer barrier's failure through his tablet's readouts. The station's automated alerts pinged relentlessly as Crix's cutting beams penetrated the last defensive layer. Through rapidly deteriorating security feeds, he observed security teams advancing through Vrax's experimental pressure fields. His fingers flew across the interface, executing a desperate countermeasure. Ancient emergency purge protocols activated in precise sequence, triggering a cascade of controlled decompressions. Warning klaxons blared as emergency bulkheads slammed shut, creating a rippling wave of atmospheric evacuations that swept outward from his position. Multiple hull breaches detected, Zrixak transmitted. All teams fall back to secured sections. The security feeds showed armored figures stumbling as the sudden pressure changes knocked them off balance. Their environment suits emergency thrusters fired sporadically, struggling to maintain stability in the turbulent conditions. A new voice cut through the command channel. Emergency Operations Director Thilax assuming control of crisis response. Billy watched the male Gorn specialist connect directly to primary engineering interfaces. Hardware override modules extended from his equipment, bypassing software controls to establish direct neural links with core systems. Station functions began responding to his commands, ignoring Billy's automated credentials. Executing master override sequence, Thilax announced. Initiating systematic control recovery. Access warnings flashed across Billy's tablet as critical systems dropped offline. Emergency lighting flickered as power networks responded to Thilax's hardware-level commands, cutting off Billy's remaining connections to auxiliary controls. Alert! Maintenance Supervisor Leixis transmitted. Iron Fang thruster configuration unstable. Detecting critical radiation spikes. The female Gorn's sensor readings appeared in the command channel. The weapon pod's containment field generators sparked violently as radiation from the ship's malfunctioning thrusters bombarded the exposed equipment. Chemical analysis reports streamed across Billy's tablet, showing rapid degradation of the biological agent's molecular structure. Weapon pod contents neutralized, Combat Engineer Krivax confirmed. Radiation exposure has rendered the agent inert. Emergency Medical Officer Rika's urgent transmissions drew Billy's attention to SS Skith's deteriorating condition. The Supreme Overlord's medical pod displayed complete system failure warnings as its backup power reserves depleted. Patient entering terminal phase, Rika reported. Portable life support ineffective. Supreme Overlord non-responsive. Through the remaining security feeds, Billy observed SS Skith's personal guard abandoning their defensive positions. The unconscious leader's medical transport accelerated toward emergency evacuation routes as his vital signs continued their irreversible decline. Lyra's voice transmitted through a private channel, activating emergency maintenance override, creating physical barrier. High-temperature coolant burst from ruptured maintenance lines, filling adjacent corridors with clouds of superheated vapor. Security teams recoiled from the spreading chemical barrier, their environment suits external sensors registering dangerous temperature readings. Unauthorized system access detected, Emergency Operations Director Thilax announced. Tracking source location. Security teams converge on Engineering Section 3. The security feeds showed Lyra abandoning her workstation as armored figures approached her position. She disappeared into maintenance access ways as Thylax's override protocols locked down additional station systems. Deploying containment specialist Vrex, combat coordinator Z-Rixak transmitted. Commence atmospheric solidification sequence. The male Gorn specialist activated experimental equipment that projected crystalline matrices through the decompressed sections. The artificial structures expanded rapidly, creating solid pathways through the vacuum-exposed areas. Security teams advanced cautiously across these newly-formed bridges as Vrex's technology continued neutralizing environmental hazards. Billy's tablet displayed rapidly diminishing system access as Thylax's overrides spread through the station's networks. Security feeds showed Vrex's solidification equipment systematically eliminating the protective decompressions, while Z-Rixak's forces pressed forward through the newly secured routes. The station's remaining functional displays indicated multiple teams converging on his position. Through failing security cameras, he observed Vrex's crystalline matrices spreading through adjacent sections, transforming the chaos of vacuum-exposed corridors into stable approach vectors for the advancing security forces. Billy accessed the station's original radiation containment systems through his tablet's dwindling interface. Ancient emergency protocols activated, designed for catastrophic nuclear accidents that hadn't occurred in decades. Thick radiation barriers slid into place with pneumatic hisses, their reinforced surfaces gleaming under emergency lighting as they created an impenetrable maze between sections. Containment specialist Vrex's crystalline matrices shattered against the radiation shields. Security feeds showed armored figures stumbling backward as their advance routes disappeared behind layers of containment barriers. Multiple radiation containment protocols engaged. A female voice announced through the command channel. Radiation Safety Officer Kyla responding to emergency lockdown. The Gorn specialist's analytical data streamed across multiple displays. Her sensor readings highlighted structural weaknesses in the original containment design, places where interlocking shield segments created exploitable gaps in power distribution. Emergency operations. This is Kyla, she transmitted. Critical design flaws detected in her voice cut off as compartmentalized communication systems prevented the warning from reaching command staff. Combat Coordinator Z-Rixak's response came swiftly. Deploy Shield Penetration Specialist Grax. Begin Containment Breach Sequence. The security feeds showed Grax connecting specialized cutting equipment to portable power units. Bright energy beams carved into the radiation shield's surface, but the autonomous power supply slowed their progress compared to standard grid-connected tools. Warning indicators flashed across Billy's tablet as the Iron Fang's damaged thrusters spewed increasing radiation levels into space. Damage Control Officer Nixis extended emergency containment fields outward, creating additional sealed zones that trapped security teams between barriers. Atmospheric stabilization failing. Life support systems Engineer Thylax transmitted. Radiation interference disrupting portable processors. Emergency Medical Officer Rika's urgent voice cut through the channel traffic. Supreme Overlord Vital Signs Terminal. Neural damage extensive. Unable to restore consciousness. The security feeds showed SS Skith's personal guard establishing a medical containment zone around their fallen leader. Armed figures secured perimeter positions as medical equipment registered flatlined readings. All forces, this is Fleet Commander Visksak, a new voice announced. Assuming emergency command authority effective immediately. Billy's tablet registered Lyra's final act of sabotage as she triggered catastrophic coolant system failures. Temperature regulation fluid burst from ruptured pipes, creating impassable barriers of supercooled liquid between security team positions. Warning coolant containment failure in multiple sections. Maintenance control transmitted. Emergency isolation protocols engaged. As system access continued deteriorating, Billy discovered an integrated connection between radiation containment and diplomatic quarter safeguards. His fingers flew across the interface, extending protective fields around both Sarah's position and the human delegates. Diplomatic quarter radiation shields engaged, the system announced. Emergency protection fields active. Through remaining security feeds, he watched Security Chief Thragek's forces falling back from the sealed diplomatic section. Their weapons' fire dissipated harmlessly against the reinforced barriers. Initiating station-wide power reset. Emergency Operations Director Thilax transmitted. All automated systems will terminate in 10 minutes. Billy's tablet displayed countdown warnings as shield penetration specialist Grax's cutting beams penetrated the first radiation barrier. The security feeds showed Fleet Commander Viskzak coordinating with multiple team leaders, consolidating control over the scattered Gorn forces. Emergency lighting flickered as power systems began their shutdown sequence. Billy's access to critical systems diminished with each passing second, while Grax's cutting equipment carved through additional layers of radiation shielding. The clock continued counting down toward total system failure. Billy's fingers raced across his tablet interface as the countdown to total system shutdown continued. Through the remaining security feeds, he accessed ancient maintenance protocols buried deep within the station's original programming. A series of commands activated emergency radiation containment fields, their blue-white barriers materializing at key junction points throughout the station. Detecting unauthorized containment field activation, Thilax transmitted. Source traced to maintenance subsystems. The radiation barriers formed an interconnected network of protected corridors. Security feeds showed Grax's cutting beams slicing through the first radiation shield, releasing a burst of residual radiation that filled the breached section with a hazardous purple haze. Area contaminated, Grax reported, awaiting atmospheric processing. A new signal cut through the command channel. Emergency Evacuation Coordinator Rena reporting, beginning standard evacuation procedures for non-essential personnel. The female Gorn's voice carried precise authority as automated evacuation alerts echoed through station corridors. Security feeds displayed crew members responding to the signals, creating gaps in defensive positions as they moved toward designated gathering points. Billy routed emergency power through redundant circuits, accessing backup systems originally installed for catastrophic containment scenarios. His tablet displayed successful connections as auxiliary power flowed through protected channels. Alert, Radiation Safety Officer Kyla transmitted, detecting electromagnetic interference patterns from containment field matrix. The security feeds showed Grax's cutting equipment sparking erratically as waves of interference disrupted its calibration. His teams paused between each breach attempt, forced to reconfigure their equipment. Lyra's final act of sabotage triggered cascading alarms across engineering displays. Primary coolant regulators overloaded, releasing torrents of temperature control fluid into maintenance access ways. The security feeds showed Zrix's teams scrambling to maintain position as chemical barriers formed between their positions. Deploying breach team leader Crocs, Zrix announced. Establish powered assault routes immediately. The male Gorn specialist connected portable generators to critical junction points, but electromagnetic interference from the radiation barriers caused power fluctuations in his equipment. Warning indicators flashed as the generators struggled to maintain stable output. Through the diplomatic quarter's security feeds, Billy observed his protective corridors taking shape. The radiation containment fields powered by independent backup generators maintained their integrity as other station systems prepared for shutdown. Support vessel sensors detecting increased radiation spread. Fleet Commander Viskzak transmitted from his new command center. Establishing outer containment perimeter. All reinforcement vessels hold position. The Iron Fang's damaged thrusters continued spewing radiation into space, forcing support ships to maintain distance. Their sensor readings appeared in the command channel, showing expanding zones of contamination around the station. Billy's tablet displayed the final seconds of Thylax's countdown. The radiation containment fields hummed with steady power as other systems began shutting down in sequence. Security feeds showed Grax's teams positioning for their next breach attempt, while Crox's portable generators sparked against waves of electromagnetic interference. Emergency lighting dimmed as primary power networks went offline. Through failing security feeds, Billy observed Fleet Commander Viskzak coordinating with his scattered forces, preparing for their next advance through the maze of radiation barriers and chemical obstacles. The station systems continued their systematic shutdown, but the diplomatic emergency protocols maintained their protective fields. Billy's tablet registered successful power, routing through the independent backup generators as darkness spread through surrounding sections. Grax's cutting beams flared against radiation shields that refused to fail, their energy dissipating in waves of electromagnetic interference that forced his teams to pause and recalibrate after each attempt. Billy's fingers flew across his tablet interface in the final seconds before station-wide shutdown. He activated a series of emergency protocols within the diplomatic quarters systems, routing power through independent backup generators. The generators hummed to life, their steady thrum echoing through protected corridors as other station systems went dark. Alert diplomatic quarter maintaining power integrity, announced the automated system. Independent backup generators engaged. A new voice cut through the command channel. Crisis Resolution Specialist Merrick's reporting. Initial situational assessment indicates critical protocol violations. The male Gorn's analytical tone carried authority as he transmitted from Central Command. Fleet Commander Viskzak, Supreme Overlord SS Skith's incapacitation requires immediate High Council notification. Leadership succession protocols demand activation. Security feeds showed Grax's cutting equipment piercing the second radiation barrier. Bright energy arced outward as the breach released electromagnetic interference. The surge rolled through nearby sections, connecting with Crox's portable generators. Electrical discharge crackled across power units, sending cascading failures through the equipment. Generator bank failure. Crox transmitted. All teams fall back from affected zones. Armored figures retreated from sparking equipment as the electromagnetic surge disabled their power supplies. Through remaining security feeds, Billy observed security teams abandoning their positions, forced back by waves of interference. The station's original disaster prevention systems activated automatically as coolant regulation failed. Heavy blast doors slid into place, their ancient mechanisms responding to detected hazards. Security teams found their routes blocked as emergency seals divided compromised sections. Warning, automated containment engaging, the system announced. Multiple sections isolated. Fleet Commander Viskzak's transmission carried increasing static. Support vessels detecting expanded radiation spread, increasing safety perimeter to minimum safe distance. The Iron Fang's damaged thrusters continued pouring radiation into space, forcing command ships further from the station. Tactical coordination degraded as distance and interference complicated communications between station forces and their leadership. Deploying Environmental Warfare Specialist Thex, Combat Coordinator Z. Riksak announced. Commence radiation field neutralization. The specialist activated specialized equipment designed to disrupt containment fields. Energy pulses struck the diplomatic quarters barriers but dissipated harmlessly against independently powered shields. Neutralization ineffective, Thex reported. Target barriers operating on isolated power grid. Through his tablet interface, Billy monitored the diplomatic emergency systems, maintaining their integrity. The independent power supply created interference patterns that rippled through nearby distribution nodes, preventing Thylax's reset from achieving complete shutdown in connected sections. Multiple systems retaining partial functionality, Thylax transmitted. Unable to achieve full power reset due to diplomatic grid interference. Crisis Resolution Specialist Merrick's voice cut through channel traffic again. Fleet Commander, High Council protocols require immediate response. Supreme Overlord Skith's condition threatens command structure stability. Security feeds showed shield penetration specialist Grax's teams regrouping with modified equipment, preparing for another breach attempt. The diplomatic quarters' radiation barriers maintained their protective field as Billy established control through his secured access points. All forces hold position, Fleet Commander Viskzak transmitted. Awaiting High Council response regarding command authority. The station's remaining functional displays showed security teams scattered between sealed sections, separated by radiation barriers and automated containment doors. Environmental Warfare Specialist Thex's equipment continued its ineffective attempts to penetrate the diplomatic quarters' defenses as emergency power sustained critical systems within the protected zones. Billy's fingers darted across his tablet interface, accessing the diplomatic quarters communication array through the secured corridor network. The security feeds displayed the confusion spreading through Gorn command channels as Crisis Resolution Specialist Merrick's announcement about succession protocols rippled through the ranks. Transmitting verified footage to Gorn High Council, Billy announced into the encrypted channel to Sarah. Sending complete sensor records of Supreme Overlord Skith's medical status. The data packet contained high-resolution footage from the medical bay, showing Skith's unconscious form and the attending physician's concerned expressions. Within moments, Fleet Commander Viskzak's command frequency erupted with priority alerts. High Council transmission incoming, the automated system announced. Priority Alpha. Through the security feeds, Billy watched Viskzak receive the message. The commander's scaled features tightened as he processed the Council's direct order to stand down all military operations. His clawed hand hovered over the command console, muscles tensing beneath armored plates. Emergency Operations Director Thylax to all units, the channel crackled. Continue breach operations. Diplomatic quarter must be secured. Shield penetration specialist Grax's response carried clear tension. Negative, Director. High Council orders supersede local command authority. All cutting teams, power down equipment. The security feeds showed Grax's teams stepping back from their positions, deactivating their cutting equipment. Emergency lighting cast deep shadows across their armored forms as they withdrew from the radiation barriers. Sarah, route coordinates to my tablet, Billy transmitted. I'm moving to your position through the protected corridors. His sister's response came through their secured channel. Coordinates received. Human delegates assembled and ready for evacuation. Emergency docking port 7 shows clear on internal sensors. Billy navigated through the radiation-shielded passages, his tablet displaying real-time updates of security team movements. The protective fields hummed with steady power as he passed each junction point, their blue-white barriers maintaining integrity. Combat Coordinator Zrixak's voice cut through the command frequency. Alpha Team, form up at Junction 12. We will prevent unauthorized departures. Environmental warfare equipment failing to penetrate diplomatic barriers, Specialist Thex reported. Unable to establish breach point near docking port. Billy reached Sarah's position in the diplomatic quarter. She stood with the human delegates, her own tablet displaying evacuation routes through the protected corridors. The group moved swiftly through the secured passages while Billy monitored security feeds. Rescue vessel establishing position outside radiation perimeter, Sarah announced, checking sensor readings. Docking port alignment in progress. The security feeds showed Zrix's team advancing toward their position, but the radiation barriers forced them to take indirect routes. Environmental warfare specialist Thex's equipment sparked uselessly against the protected corridor's independent power grid. A new alert flashed across command channels. The Gorn High Council's transmission declared Supreme Overlord SS Skith officially removed from power, replaced by an emergency leadership committee. Fleet Commander Visxak's expression remained rigid as he received orders to surrender all weapons development data. Engineering Assistant Lyra reporting. A familiar voice transmitted. Initiating sensor system overload sequence. The station's external sensors flickered and failed in sequence, creating an expanding blind zone around emergency docking port 7. Billy guided the final group of delegates toward the airlock while Sarah established connection with the rescue vessel's docking system. Through remaining security feeds, Billy observed Zrix's team reaching the outer corridor, stopped by the radiation containment field. The combat coordinator slammed an armored fist against the barrier in frustration as the human delegates boarded their vessel. Sensor systems critical, Lyra transmitted. Overload cascade spreading through monitoring network. Sarah initiated emergency departure procedures, while Billy transferred the final data packets documenting the biological weapons program. The rescue vessel's airlock sealed with a soft hiss, and the docking clamps released their hold. The station's compromised sensors failed to track their departure as the rescue vessel slipped away through the radiation-filled space around the damaged Iron Fang. Billy's tablet displayed their successful trajectory away from the station, carrying with them the evidence that would reshape Gorn political structure and end a dangerous weapons program before it could threaten galactic peace.